Chapter 9:36. Chui Yongji stopped in front of Qin Yu, a strange expression on his face. It seemed as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he couldn't say anything. The finger that he pointed out was split in half from the tip. The incomparably neat cut seemed to be sealed by an invisible force, and not a single drop of blood flowed out. Then this cut continued upwards, passing through the palm, wrist, arm, body, head. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Chui Yongji's entire body was cleanly split in half, as if it had been measured with precision. His corpse fell to the sides, but before it could touch the ground, it turned to ash and vanished without a trace. The entire courtyard was deathly silent. Gao Xian's eyes trembled. He tightly locked onto Qin Yu. In that instant, he felt an inconceivably sharp and terrifying aura. Even he felt this aura the moment he felt it. His heart chilled, as if he had entered a world of ice and snow. Before he could truly grasp the essence of this aura, it suddenly disappeared, not leaving a single trace behind. It was as if everything had been an illusion, as if it had never appeared. But Chui Yongji's disappearing ash was proof that some sort of terrifying strength had indeed descended upon this world. Gao Xian's eyes deeply locked onto Qin Yu. From the first moment he saw him, he knew that Qin Yu wasn't as simple as he seemed on the surface. But it was only now that he truly realized that this person had hidden himself deeper than he had imagined. Just who was he? Li Hongye's eyes brightened. On her cold and indifferent face, there was a rare blush of excitement. Sword. It was the aura of a sword. Although it had only descended for a moment before vanishing, she was a natural swordsman. Her brilliant sword heart didn't have a single speck of dust, so she was able to capture its true meaning. Vast, mighty, endless. When she felt its aura, Li Hongye felt as if the entire world was flooded with sword intent. It was as if as long as it slightly shook, the heavens and earth would collapse and all things would be destroyed. Just like Chui Yongji who had been killed, his life force would be completely extinguished. But with Qin Yu's cultivation, it was impossible for him to comprehend or control such a sword intent. He must have some sort of supreme sword treasure on him. In Li Hongye's speculations, it was highly likely that a super powerhouse of the sword had condensed his sword intent into a sword orb after his death. This kind of treasure was extremely rare. Many years ago, when she followed her teacher to pay respects to the patriarch and completed the last step of becoming his disciple, she was fortunate enough to see a sword sphere. It was only the size of a thumb, and its entire body was round. Its surface was uneven and slightly rough, just like a real meatball. When it was cooked in clear water, its fragrance would assail the nostrils. But at that time, under the attack of the sword pellet, the heavens split open, as if the world had been opened. The crazed devil who had reached the peak of the 10,000 Swords mountain immediately fled while weeping blood and never appeared in the mortal world again. This also explained why Qin Yu had the ability to kill others. So why did he need to borrow strength from others? This was because the sword sphere was the remnant might of a sword proficiency cultivator. Every time it was used, a portion of its power would be consumed until it finally dissipated. Gao Xian left to observe the stars, and the examination continued. However, at this moment, the gazes of the crowd were not on the examination stone. Instead, they were focused on the departing couple. Qin Yu's aura was still ordinary, but in the eyes of everyone, his back had become incomparably tall, as if he could pierce through the skies. Dan Hong respectfully followed behind, secretly rejoicing that he had only been thinking about it and hadn't had the chance to show any disrespect. Otherwise, he would have been in trouble. The city lord truly had a keen eye for talent. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, who would have believed that Qin Yu possessed such strength? To instantly cut down Chui Yongji, this cultivation was no weaker than that of a legendary proud son of heaven. As they left the heavens pivot, the outside world seemed to know what was happening inside. Countless eyes gathered on them, all of them revealing deep awe. Qin Yu pulled Lei Xiaoyu and walked towards the Rock City caravan. Wherever he went, everyone moved aside. At this time, The cry of a sword rang out from behind him. It flashed and appeared in front of him, blocking his path. Qin Yu frowned. Please move aside. Li Hongye had a faint expression. Qin Yu, fight me. Whoosh! Countless eyes widened. After a brief moment of shock, they turned to excitement. The Li family's sword fanatic, who had suppressed the imperial city with her sword, actually wanted to challenge the heavens pivot and kill the divine realm Qin Yu in a single strike. This naturally caused everyone's blood to boil over. Qin Yu's frown deepened. What? The Li family's sword fanatic paused, as if she had never encountered such a situation before. Surprise flashed in her eyes. You want to refuse? When the divine seal Saint Stone descended, those that passed the test had the qualifications to bathe in their perception and obtain the lucky chances bestowed upon them by the Saint Stone. But the strength of the perception obtained was also different depending on the position. The closer one was to the Saint Stone, the stronger and clearer their perception would be. How would they arrange their positions? This was a cultivator. Strength was everything. Whoever was stronger would obtain a better position. Thus, when the divine seal Saint Stone descended in the past, if a cultivator was confident they could obtain a better position, they would issue a challenge on their own initiative in order to establish their status. As for those that were challenged, unless there was a great disparity in strength, they wouldn't refuse. Otherwise, their reputation would be swept to the ground. Li Hongyan never imagined that Qin Yu, who had plotted to kill Cui Yongji and overturn Heaven's Pivot's reputation, would actually refuse her challenge. But this was the truth. Qin Yu nodded. I refuse. He pulled Lei Xiaoyu, wanted to circle around. Shua. Li Hongye continued to block the way. Qin Yu, I need a reason. Looking into her eyes, Qin Yu could feel the firm while hidden beneath the icy coldness. He rubbed his temples. Because it's meaningless. In my opinion, every breath of time in life is incomparably precious. Once it passes, it cannot be recovered. So, wasting time is a terrifying matter. Li Hongye's expression turned even colder. In your opinion, fighting me is a waste of time? Qin Yu glanced at her. That's right. There was another uproar. Countless cultivators widened their eyes. They never imagined that Qin Yu would be so merciless. It had to be known that the one in front of him was Li Hongye. She wielded her sword and swept through all the sword cultivators in the imperial city. She had never tasted defeat. In this world, she was an outstanding figure of the younger generation, an existence like the bright moon in the skies. Even if Qin Yu killed Cui Yongji and proved his strength, that he had the qualifications to be arrogant. In their opinion, this was still too excessive. But to his surprise, Li Hongye didn't fly into a rage out of humiliation. After a moment of silence, she slowly said, Qin Yu, let's fight today. If you can win, I'll guarantee that you won't be disturbed in the imperial city. She paused and continued. This is my promise to you in the name of the great Chusli family. Everyone here can bear witness. Qin Yu thought for a moment. What if I fail? Li Hongye said, I will take something from you. As she spoke, she stared at Qin Yu's face. He seemed a little surprised, and then a hint of mockery appeared in his eyes. His face flushed red. It had been a long time since the sword maniac had felt this kind of embarrassment. His sword heart hardened, and he suppressed his emotions. He said in a low voice, If you don't dare to agree, then when the divine seal, Saint Stone, descends, you must stand at the edge. This is a rule that has been passed down over the years. Qin Yu raised an eyebrow. He turned his head and whispered to Dan Hong, as if asking something. After getting a reply, he nodded. All right, I agree to your challenge. But I also have a rule. Anyone who wishes to fight with me must first defeat my family's driver. He didn't turn his head. Bamboo come out. Bamboo didn't feel any dissatisfaction at being called a driver. Rather, he felt a bit proud of himself. This was because he was well aware of Senior Qin's true status. Not just anyone had the qualifications to approach him. Looking at the old man Bamboo, there was a third uproar outside Heaven's Pivot. Many youths who had fallen in love with the beautiful sword maniac widened their eyes in anger and shame. In their eyes, Qin Yu's current actions were in naked humiliation. But soon, they discovered that things weren't as they had imagined. Li Hongye's eyes fell on Bamboo, who was standing in front of Qinyu after respectfully bowing. Her eyes were especially dignified. Unlike the appearance of a disheveled old man that others saw, the bamboo in her eyes was like an unsheathed treasure sword. He was silent, but at every moment, he gave off a sharp aura that made people shiver. Taking a step back, Li Hongye cupped her hands together. I asked for your guidance. Those that were familiar with her all knew that this sword maniac was incomparably proud. The only people she would treat with respect were opponents that she regarded highly. The crowd drew back, but when they looked at him, there was still surprise in their eyes. This old man didn't seem like a powerhouse at all. Bamboo only used a single step to completely change the minds of these people. As his foot fell, his aura erupted. A sharp and fierce sword intent swept out in all directions like a raging flood. He lifted a hand. Perhaps it was because he had been tempered by life and death experiences, but Bamboo's sword intent was much more solid and tyrannical than before. He simply lifted his finger and slashed it down, giving off a horrifying feeling as if the sword edge was about to cut through flesh and bone. Countless people cried out. They subconsciously drew back to avoid this horrifying feeling. Their eyes widened in horror. Li Hongye's eyes brightened. The cry of a sword rang out, as if it could pierce through the thick clouds and pierce through the highest heavens, able to pierce through all. Bamboo revealed a look of awe. He thought that this misty was truly worthy of being the most dazzling powerhouse of the Empire's younger generation. Even if she hadn't stepped into the divine realm, her strength was already startling. There was no need for her to make any further breakthroughs in her swordsmanship. As long as she reached the divine realm, she would be at the peak. Defeating him would only take a flip of her hand. But now, by relying on her superiority in cultivation, she might be able to put up a fight. With a deep breath, Bamboo's long hair stirred without wind. His robes puffed up, and a threatening aura burst out from his body. But in the next moment, his eyes widened, revealing a bit of astonishment. With a ripping sound, his robes were torn apart like a punctured balloon. Bamboo's complexion paled, and his aura instantly weakened. As if he were drunk, Bamboo drew back again and again. Every step he took caused the ground to crack, but there were no cracks that spread outwards. Rather, an invisible sword intent cut deep into the ground, the fissures sharp and clear. Break! As he retreated, Bamboo clenched his teeth and roared out loud. The air exploded like thunder. Li Hongye's figure fluttered backwards. She frowned, a trace of her hair fluttering in front of her eyes. Ha! Qinyu lifted a hand to catch Bamboo's figure. The raging sword intent in his body seemed to suffer an invisible suppression. It suddenly stagnated and then dissipated. My lord, Bamboo is incompetent. I have lost face for you. Qinyu shook his head. You have done your best. He let go and stepped forwards. Miss Li, according to our agreement, I accept your challenge. Chapter 9:37. Wait a moment. From the crowd, a one-armed old man with a sword on his back walked out. Li Hongye restrained her sword intent. Teacher, the crowd's eyes changed. In the past, the Li family had asked the royal family to step forward and suppress Myriad Swords Mountain to accept Li Hongye as a disciple. This matter had caused an uproar, and many people knew of it. This old man was actually someone from Myriad Swords Mountain? If he could satisfy the Li family and become Li Hongye's teacher, how could he be an ordinary person? Tang, he cupped his hands together. Honored One's sword cultivation is profound, and my disciple is no match for you. I admit defeat on her behalf, and the agreement is over. Li Hongye looked up. I want to try. Tang, he shook his head. There is no need for you to say anything about this. He took 2 steps forwards and looked Qinyu up and down. He slowly said, May I ask if Honored One has any relationship with my Myriad Swords Mountain lineage? Qinyu's thoughts stirred. He shook his head. Teacher didn't mention it, so I don't know. Tang, he had an urgent expression. May I ask if Honored One's teacher is... Qinyu furrowed his eyebrows. Tang, he bitterly smiled. My apologies, I was too presumptuous. I will visit Honored One another in the future. Us teacher and disciple bid our farewells. Then he pulled Li Hongye and left through the crowd. Outside of Heaven's Pivot, the atmosphere changed once more. Everyone's eyes were filled with shock. Before he even attacked, he could force a myriad swords mountain powerhouse to admit defeat. This Qin Yu's strength was actually terrifying. Watching Tang Yi and Li Hongye leave, Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He turned and pulled on Lei Xiaoyu. "Let's go." They boarded the carriage and the caravan turned around, leaving under countless awestruck gazes. At this time, the news that the Li family sword maniac had challenged and his teacher had admitted defeat began to spread throughout the entire imperial city at an astonishing speed. And Mo Yuan sat in the carriage, her eyebrows furrowed together. As she watched the Lei family's caravan leave, the surprise in her eyes became increasingly thick. This person's voice, that was impossible. He had fallen into the hands of the dragon overlord and had no chance of survival. So why would he appear here? But it really was very similar. It wasn't just his voice, but also his every movement and movement. "Miss." The driver hesitated, and Mo Yuan let out a breath. "Let's go." At the same time, in the highest tower of Heaven's Pivot, Xiao Yunhai was watching with furrowed eyebrows. As the bureau head of the Heavenly Punishment Division, he naturally had to personally inspect the descent of the Divine Seal Holy Stone to ensure that there were no accidents. Today, he had come to Dubhe just to do some routine work, but he had an unexpected discovery. "Qin Yu," Xiao Yunhai muttered. A sharp light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Since this person was able to make him feel a trace of karma, even though he had yet to find out this person's identity, he was definitely related to Xiao Lin's death. "Pass down my order. Speed up the investigation and find out this person's identity as soon as possible." Behind him, the Heavenly Punishment Department cultivators respectfully acknowledged. As the carriage moved away from Heaven's Pivot, Qin Yu let out a breath and looked back. Earlier, the oppressive feeling that caused his heart to palpitate and made it difficult for him to breathe had vanished. Who could it be? Although the other party hadn't revealed himself, he could still sense the thick, killing intent in his aura, making him feel as if there was a blade on his back. The enemy wasn't scary. What was scary was the hostility that came from nowhere. This kind of unknown and uncontrollable hostility often represented great terror. Lei Xiaoyu opened her eyes. "Big brother Qin, what's wrong?" Qin Yu shook his head. "I'm fine. Too many people were looking at me just now, so I was a bit nervous." Lei Xiaoyu covered her mouth and laughed. Big brother Qin, he really loved to speak nonsense. She thought for a moment and hesitantly said, "Big brother Qin, I just passed the test." Qin Yu rubbed her head. "In order to treat your injuries, I left behind some small methods in your body, so I was able to help you." Lei Xiaoyu let out a breath of relief. "That's good. I was worried that you would pay a great price for doing that." Qin Yu smiled and shook his head. "All right, don't think too much about it. Continue resting for a while." Lei Xiaoyu closed her eyes. "Thank you, big brother Qin." The carriage drove into the Imperial City's Thunder Mansion. After Lei Xiaoyu was settled in, Qin Yu thought for a moment and said, "If teacher Li Hongye comes, invite him in." Dan Hong respectfully nodded. An hour later, a report came in from outside the mansion. Myriad Sword Mountain's Elder Tang Yi had come to pay a visit. Dan Hong sighed with emotion. He thought that this great figure was truly a great figure. He could even predict this. As he ordered for Tang Yi to come in, he personally informed Qin Yu. Qin Yu's eyes revealed a bit of surprise. He never imagined that Tang Yi would be so eager. But since Tang Yi had come, there was no reason not to see him. He stood up and said, "Bring me to see him." In the reception hall, with Tang Yi's status, even if Lei Qianjun came, he still had the qualifications to speak to him on equal terms. After all, Myriad Sword Mountain was one of the strongest sects in Great Chu. They had 100,000 sword cultivators and countless powerhouses. The status of an elder was incomparably noble. Qin Yu stepped in. He cupped his hands together and said, "Since Elder Tang has come personally, I apologize for not going out to meet you." Tang Yi bowed in return. "Mr. Qin is too serious." Both sides sat down. Seeing Tang Yi's anxious expression, Qin Yu dismissed the maids in the reception hall. Tang Yi took a deep breath. He cupped his hands together and said, "Mr. Qin, I believe you have already guessed my purpose for coming here. I won't beat around the bush." His eyes revealed a bit of nervousness. "May I ask, Mr. Qin, is that great master of yours surnamed Su?" Qin Yu maintained his composure. "Elder Tang, if possible, you should first tell me why you care so much about my master." Tang, he hesitated, but as he saw Qin Yu's indifferent expression, he clenched his teeth and said, "This matter is a secret of my myriad sword mountain. I ask that Mr. Qin not speak of it to others." Qin Yu nodded. "Of course." Tang Yi said, "My myriad sword mountain has an inheritance of tens of thousands of years. 2 generations ago, there was a junior granduncle surnamed Su. He was a dazzling talent and was favored by the mountain master at the time. The mountain master wanted to pass on the throne and have him rule over myriad sword mountain. But for some unknown reason, junior granduncle's temperament changed overnight. He raised his sword and killed 3 elders of the sect. After his battle with the old mountain master, he disappeared. To tear apart a secret that myriad sword mountain tried so hard to suppress in front of outsiders. His complexion wasn't too good. But in order to win Qin Yu's trust, he couldn't hide anything. He took a deep breath and continued to say, for such a great crime, he should have been expelled from the sect and chased down regardless of the price. But the old mountain master only said that myriad sword mountain had let down junior granduncle. So he removed his name from the sect, and this matter came to an end. 100 years later, the old mountain master died of depression. Before he died, he left behind a final order for the cultivators of my myriad sword mountain to search for junior granduncle's whereabouts. If possible, tell him that all grievances have been settled and he can return to myriad sword mountain at any time. Qin Yu frowned. His thoughts raced several times. Elder Tang, are you saying that you can feel the aura of that junior granduncle on me? Tang Yi nodded. That's right. My myriad sword mountain focuses on the path of the sword. Between fellow disciples, there is even a connection between sword intents. When Mr. Qin attacked in Heaven's Pivot, my sword heart sensed it, so I took the liberty to ask. Tang Yi took a deep breath and stood up. Mr. Qin, this matter concerns the final wishes of the old mountain master. I ask that you tell me the truth. Qin Yu fell silent. As he hesitated, his thoughts raced. First of all, he was sure that what Tang Yi sensed was the sword intent he perceived in the world of the blood moon. But this was also something that Qin Yu couldn't figure out. Although he had only slashed out a single sword strike and borrowed the strength of those countless sword scars, Qin Yu didn't doubt its strength at all. If the sword scars in the world of the blood moon were really related to that senior granduncle of myriad sword mountain, then with his strength, he feared that a single sword strike would be enough to raise the entire myriad sword mountain to the ground. If so, why would they allow their inheritance to continue to this day? Qin Yu had a guess in his heart. The greatest possibility was that the senior granduncle of myriad sword mountain was the same as him and had also perceived the silver moon sword intent. This was why Tang Yi had misunderstood him. Qin Yu let out a deep breath and made a decision. He shook his head and said, Elder Tang, I am very sorry. I do not know my teacher's name, and he has never mentioned anything about myriad sword mountain to me. Tang Yi revealed an anxious expression. Mr. Qin, I wonder if you could introduce me. Qin Yu refused without hesitation. What nonsense! He didn't even know where his teacher was, so how could he ask someone to pay respects to him? Tang Yi bitterly smiled. Then, could I ask Mr. Qin to pass on a message? Qin Yu nodded. I can try, but I cannot guarantee anything. Tang Yi relaxed. At least he hadn't come up empty-handed. He hurriedly said, I ask Mr. Qin to pass on a message that the old mountain master has decided to return the sword he left in the mountain to junior granduncle. If he wishes, he can return to the mountain at any time to take it. As Tang Yi left, Qin Yu frowned. Sword? Could it be that the junior granduncle of myriad sword mountain was able to perceive the silver moon sword intent because of that sword? If this was true, then he really should make a trip to myriad sword mountain. Perhaps it would allow Qin Yu to control the faint sword intent as soon as possible. He took a deep breath and slowly suppressed these thoughts. Even if he really wanted to go, he would have to wait until the matters of the imperial city were over. Now that he had passed the test, he only needed to wait for the divine seal, Saint Stone, to descend. But even today, Qin Yu had ordered the cultivators of Rock City to inquire about the origin god's corpse. They hadn't obtained any information related to it. Where was the turning point to save Lei Xiaoyu? Or perhaps there was a problem with Lei Qianjuan's information channels? It couldn't be. With Lei Qianjuan's temperament and how much he valued Lei Xiaoyu, he wouldn't have allowed her to come if he didn't have absolute confidence. Well, he would patiently wait. Since Lei Qianjun didn't remind him, he would receive the news once it appeared. That's right. Qin Yu had decided to save Lei Xiaoyu. From a moment she leapt out of the tree hole, awakened her control of Thunder Bloodline, and risked her life in a final strike, Qin Yu had made his decision. He couldn't force the little blue lamp to consume its source, but he could decide to take this risk himself. But before that, Qin Yu needed to increase his own strength as much as possible. In the end, the eternal prosperity great Tao wasn't a strength that truly belonged to him. There was still a gap in opening the fourth road to the divine realm. The divine seal Saint Stone that was about to descend was Qin Yu's chance. If it really did possess the mystical ability of the legends, then Qin Yu could definitely smoothly open it and obtain even greater harvests. Suppressing these thoughts, Qin Yu returned to his room to cultivate. What he said to Li Hongye before wasn't just a perfunctory act. In the flow of the world, once a breath of time passed, it could never be recovered. How could he disappoint her? Xiang Shui walked out from the shadows, a look of dissatisfaction on her face. There are many eyes outside, and most of them have ill intentions. You still have the mood to cultivate? Qin Yu waved his hand. Don't worry. Someone has agreed to protect me from being disturbed in the Imperial City. She will do it. An hour later, the Imperial City garrison was temporarily mobilized. 3,000 military officers blocked off the streets of the Thunder Mansion, and no one was allowed to enter or leave. Looking at all the influential figures in the world, the only one that could accomplish this was the Li family that had taken root in the army and controlled half of Great Chu's military power for generations. The Li family sword fanatic had made his move. 3,000 military officers wasn't many, and they weren't strong enough. Any peak divine realm powerhouse could easily slaughter through several of them. But this was the imperial capital of Great Chu. To attack the Imperial City garrison was the same as provoking the dignity of the royal family. No one dared to withstand the consequences. Chapter 9:38. The Great Chu Imperial Palace gathered the momentum of the world, condensing the laws of heaven and earth to form a sun that never fell, bathing the palace in divine light. But where there was light, there would be darkness. It just hid in places that normal people couldn't reach. The Imperial Palace was located in the center of the palace. Even with Emperor Chu's status, he couldn't enter and exit as he pleased. This was where the founding ancestors of the Great Chu Empire lived. The palace doors were closed, and the windows were closed. Within the Grand Palace, there was only darkness, and the air was cold. I said before, you are not allowed to cause trouble in the imperial capital. An old voice sounded in the palace. It was calm but filled with an unquestionable majesty, as if everything in the world could be decided with a single word. Another voice sounded. It came from the darkness of the palace and couldn't be found. This was just an accident. I don't care if it was an accident or not. Just don't let something like this happen again. The old voice continued. After a moment of silence, the voice in the darkness smiled. Of course, everything will be as you say. Li Hongye finally waited for her teacher to return. Her expression was indifferent, but her eyes were firm. You need to give me a reason. Tang, he was helpless. He knew his disciple's personality and knew that if he didn't give her an explanation, she would try other opportunities. He let out a breath and slowly said, I can only tell you one thing. Your guess about Qin Yu was wrong. He didn't kill Cui Yongji with external force, but with his own strength. Li Hongye's eyes brightened. Sword light seemed to flash through the void. Impossible. That sword intent was vast and vast, able to cut the sun and moon. Even a god realm cultivator couldn't comprehend it. Moreover, Qin Yu hadn't even stepped into the god realm. How could he control such a terrifying sword intent? Tang, he shook his head. The world is vast, and there are trillions of mysteries. How can you, and I know them all? He glanced at her, just like you. In the eyes of the world, aren't you a miraculous existence? You can suppress the imperial city with a sword before entering the god realm. Qin Yu, he is just stronger than you. Li Hongya was expressionless. Tang, he shouted, Hongya, remember what I said today. Don't try to challenge him again, or you will die. Li Hongya turned around and left. I'll try again after I reach the immortal state. Seeing her leave, Tang Yi's mouth twitched, revealing a bitter smile. This disciple of his had an extremely prideful temperament. Of course, she did have the strength to be prideful. But in this world there were indeed some people. They were existences that surpassed the imagination of ordinary people. They were not people that could be touched by humans. For example, in the past, the little granduncle master who only existed by word of mouth and was only qualified to be an elder or above. For instance, although Qin Yu seemed ordinary on the surface, he was actually hiding his strength deeply, like an unfathomable nebula. Tang Yi didn't doubt that when Li Hongya held the sword and entered the spirit realm, she would become the peak existence below the original god realm in this world. But at that time, just how strong would Qin Yu be? He couldn't imagine it, and he didn't dare to imagine it. After all, if the hidden rumors were true, then since Qin Yu had comprehended the sword intent, he had already stepped onto a path that ordinary people couldn't reach. The Silver Moon Sword intent wasn't a name that Qin Yu had come up with. Rather, it had been branded into his mind the moment he perceived it. Perhaps it really did represent a great Tao that led straight to the heavens. Once he reached the peak, he would be able to see the vast and boundless scenery of the world. But Qin Yu was sure that this road wouldn't be easy to walk. It could even be said that it was filled with dangers and terror. On this point, after using the Silver Moon Sword intent twice in Heaven's Pivot, he could confirm that he had been locked onto by some terrifying existence in the dark. Every time he used the Silver Moon Sword intent, the lock would become a bit clearer until it finally formed a coordinate that could cross space and descend. Qin Yu didn't know what he would face at that time, but his intuition told him that he didn't want to face the result. Before he had a way to resolve this lock, Qin Yu decided not to use the Silver Moon Sword intent again. He used the Sun and Moon Force field to wrap around it, isolating its aura from the outside world. There was a knock on the door, awakening Qin Yu from his cultivation. He opened his eyes, a sharp light flashing in them. Dan Hong pushed open the door and respectfully bowed. Mr. Qin, today is the day the divine seal, Saint Stone, will descend. You and the mist should leave. Qin Yu looked up at the skies. The 10,000 miles of blue skies that had been washed away by the invisible momentum of the imperial city now had a dark gray vortex in them. It was in his line of sight, but he couldn't sense it at all, as if it were nothing but an illusion. It's finally coming. In a sense, this vortex was indeed an illusion. Because no one could enter it, it was like a shadow. Soon, the divine seal Saint Stone would use this as a channel to descend into the world. The caravan left the Thunder Mansion. Along the wide and clean streets, it slowly drove towards Heaven's Pivot. Today, the streets were packed with people. Almost everyone was looking up at the skies with wide eyes. They didn't have the qualifications to approach the divine seal Saint Stone and obtain its gift, but they were still unwilling to leave. Perhaps if they looked at it from afar, they would be able to obtain some harvest. Over the countless years, this sort of thing had happened before. For those cultivators that didn't pass the test, it was a faint hope. When they were still some distance away from Heaven's Pivot, there were already Imperial Capital military officers stationed there. They laid down a tight blockade, and only those with permission could continue forwards. Qin Yu brought Lei Xiaoyu off the carriage. He swept his eyes over the sea of people behind them, and then pulled her towards the empty streets. Along the way, they passed through 7 inspections. Qin Yu also sensed dozens of tyrannical divine senses interweaving together to form a blockade. Without permission, whether it was in the heavens or the earth, it was impossible for anyone to approach Heaven's Pivot. A few days ago, the entrance to Heaven's Pivot had been crowded with cultivators. Now, it had been cleared away and many cultivators had gathered here. As Qin Yu and Lei Xiaoyu arrived, they immediately attracted countless gazes. There was awe hidden within them, as well as a bit of indignation and eagerness. The powerhouses of the younger generation all had confidence in themselves. They thought that even if Qin Yu was stronger now, they would definitely be stronger in the future. Catching up to Qin Yu was only a matter of time. So, when they faced Qin Yu, there was no need for them to feel too much awe. Of course, although they thought this, the strength that Qin Yu revealed was enough to obtain their approval. In the first battle, he had killed Heaven's Pivot's Cui Yongji. In the second battle, he had the Li family sword fanatic admit defeat on his behalf. Although Qin Yu's battle achievements weren't too great, just these 2 times were enough. So, as Qin Yu pulled Lei Xiaoyu along, many people frowned inwardly, but no one said a single word. A powerhouse should obtain everything that matched their own strength. This was something that had never changed since time immemorial. Halfway through, Qin Yu saw Li Hongye's figure up ahead. She was standing in front of everyone, her eyes closed. When Qin Yu looked at her, her eyes opened, and she looked back without expression. After pausing for several breaths of time, she took a step to the side. This showed that she recognized Qin Yu's strength and that he had the qualifications to stand beside her and even continue forwards. But Qin Yu had no intention of continuing forwards. He pulled Lei Xiaoyu to a stop and said, "Let's stay here." Lei Xiaoyu bit her lips. "Big brother Qin, I can do it myself. You should go further ahead. You can sense things more clearly there." Qin Yu shook his head. "It's fine." He didn't explain too much because he had absolute confidence that after refining the jade egg, as long as he was here, he would be able to clearly sense everything. But he never imagined that a moment later, he would have no choice but to change his mind. More and more people gathered in front of Heaven's Pivot. An hour later, 3 figures appeared in the skies, all of them wearing robes of the sun, moon, and stars. Their expressions were solemn and respectful. Among them was Gao Xian's grand stargazer that Qin Yu had seen before. It wasn't hard to guess the identities of these 3 people. The Saint Stone is about to descend. This is a good fortune for all of you on your road of cultivation. You must grasp this chance today and do your best to sense it. The grand stargazer in the middle slowly spoke. His dignified voice carried with it a boundless aura that rumbled into the hearts of everyone present. It was like they were being baptized by a cold spring, causing their spirits to rise and their thoughts to race faster. "Thank you, Grand Stargazer Peng Yin." Peng Yin lightly said, "Let's begin." Behind him, Gao Xian and the other Grand Stargazer all lifted their hands. Radiant starlight gushed out from their bodies, gathering together and forming a vortex of starlight. Countless motes of light sparkled within, like a true nebula decorated with millions of stars. If one looked carefully, they would discover that this starlight vortex was completely the same as the shadow-like dark gray vortex above their heads. But after the starlight vortex appeared, the first change wasn't above their heads, but the earth beneath the 3 grand stargazers. Rumble, rumble. There was a deep rumbling sound, and the earth began to ripple like water. A pitch-black altar without the least bit of impurities rose up from deep beneath the earth. There wasn't a single crack in its body, as if it had been carved from an incomparably large piece of black jade. Because it was pure, the reflection was clear. Thus, on the wall of the altar that faced the heavens, another starlight vortex appeared. Although it was a reflection, the feeling it gave off was incomparably real. It was even more real than the starlight vortex formed by the 3 grand stargazers using their own power of stars. It was strange, but it was indeed so. It was like there really was a vortex within this altar that was revolving in sync with the starlight vortex in the skies. As if the strength of the 2 starlight vortexes had finally satisfied the conditions, the shadow-like dark gray vortex in the clear blue skies finally began to respond. It was like a heavy millstone, slowly turning a little at a time. As it turned, faint traces of aura were released. It was lively and cheerful, as if it were a completely different aura from the world, a mysterious flavor. Qin Yu's eyes flashed with brilliance. Because of his previous experiences, he could instantly determine that this aura came from another world. The dark, gray vortex in the skies was actually a channel that connected to another world. No, it wasn't just that. The aura inside, a deep sorrow rose up in Qin Yu's heart without warning. He stared at the spinning vortex, his body gently shivering. It was impossible to describe this sorrow. It came from an instinct deep within his soul, and even Qin Yu himself couldn't control it in the least. In the legends, the divine seal Saint Stone that possessed infinite power and could help cultivators who hadn't reached the divinity realm open their great Tao had finally arrived. The first time Qin Yu saw it, he naturally knew its true identity, the so-called divine seal Saint Stone. It was essentially the same as the jade embryo egg he had refined into his body. Chapter 9:39. After personally refining the jade egg, Qin, you could be said to be the person in the world who had the greatest understanding of its existence and the power it contained. In its most primitive state, the jade egg was formed from the undying fragments of countless powerhouses that had fallen. It had torn apart the shackles of the rules and stood aloof from the heavens and earth. Its defensive abilities surpassed imagination. Moreover, once it encountered a threat, it could escape into the nothingness of the world. It was nearly impossible for it to be destroyed by external forces. Intuition told Qin Yu that this fragment in front of him was a jade egg that had been refined. If the person who fused with it was killed, then it would be destroyed. As soon as he thought of this, his entire body turned icy cold. Fear drilled out from the depths of his heart. It was like a giant invisible hand was gripping his throat, making it difficult for him to even breathe. Although Qin Yu had always been diligent in his cultivation, only he knew that after refining the jade egg, the confidence and wild ambitions buried deep in his heart had been truly awakened. After experiencing the might of the jade egg, he began to firmly believe that he would one day be able to climb to the peak of cultivation. But now, this confidence and wild ambitions seemed to have been doused with a bucket of cold water. Even if he had obtained a heaven-defying good fortune and was able to peek into the essence of the great Tao, even if he had nearly paved the road to the highest heavens, there was still a chance that he would be destroyed midway. This broken jade egg fragment in front of him was the best evidence of this. As Qin Yu's heart was in tumultuous waves, the divine seal, Saint Stone, that had just arrived seemed to sense the aura of its own kind coming from his body. A loud rumbling sound that only Qin Yu could hear came from within. Then, some images appeared in Qin Yu's mind. In a vast void, trillions of stars sat atop it. A giant that supported the heavens, and earth reared back its head and roared. This was a true giant, so large that the stars in the void were nothing but toys in front of him. With a roar, a terrifying aura spread outwards. A star that approached the giant violently shook before directly collapsing. At this time, 5 great hands crossed through the void, falling onto the giant's head, hands, and feet. The giant wildly struggled and roared, but he couldn't break free. An even greater tide of energy rolled and spread through the void, causing all the stars within sight to be annihilated and a part of the vast star chart before them to be completely erased. After a long deadlock, the giant let out an unwilling roar. In the next moment, his huge body was directly torn to shreds by the 5 giant hands. Fresh blood sprayed out like an ocean, instantly soaking the dark, starry sky, making it appear even darker, like an ice-cold, gaping mouth. Each of them grabbed a part of the giant's body. The 5 big hands roared and withdrew, disappearing into the vast sea of stars. Only the smell of blood continued to spread, as well as some of the splashed limbs when the giant's body was broken, tumbling and flying in all directions. The scene ended here. Qin Yu's eyes shot open, his face pale and his robes soaked in a cold sweat. He was sure that the scene that appeared in his mind happened in this world, in an ancient period of time in the past. One of them had fused with the jade embryo egg, just like him. He had grown to the point where his roar could shatter stars. However, he had been killed on the spot by the 5 mysterious beings. His body had been divided into 5 parts. Even his soul had been torn apart, leaving him no chance of survival. Thus, today, Chinyu was able to see this fragment of flesh and blood that had fallen off when his corpse split apart, condensing into a jade egg fragment. Fear crazily washed over Chinyu's mind. At this time, there was only a single thought in his mind, and that was that the existence of the jade embryo egg must be the same as the little blue lamp. It would become a secret buried in his heart forever, one that he absolutely could not tell anyone about. Suddenly, a warm feeling came from his palm. Lei Xiaoyu gripped him, her face tense. "Big Brother Qin, what is it?" Perhaps it was because of the warmth of her palm or the concern in her voice, but Qin Yu's mind suddenly calmed down, and he broke free from his fear. He took a deep breath and shook his head. "I'm fine." He paused for a moment and then continued to say, "Xiaoyu, I need to go forward a bit. If you stay with me, I fear you will be targeted." Lei Xiaoyu hurriedly said, "Big Brother Qin, it's fine. This place is very safe. I'm fine by myself." Qin Yu nodded, no longer speaking. He took a deep breath and stepped forwards. Before the divine seal Saint Stone descended, the cultivators that had the qualifications to step into this place had already completed their assigned positions. At this time, Qin Yu's sudden movement caused everyone's excited and anxious mood to stagnate. What was he doing? Soon, countless pairs of eyes widened subconsciously, revealing a look of shock. They watched helplessly as Qin Yu moved forwards. He passed Miss Mian and passed by the Li family sword maniac, but he still didn't stop. Humph! Standing side by side with Ma Yuan and Li Hongye, a youth standing in front suddenly revealed a gloomy expression. He had heard of Qin Yu's name, but he hadn't personally witnessed the 2 battles that had occurred inside and outside the Dubhe Divine Seal. Taking a step back, even if Shao Qi saw it with his own eyes, he didn't believe he was any weaker than Qin Yu. In the end, this was because he had enough confidence in himself. Whether it was the Dubhe Divine Seal or the Li family's sword maniac, none of them were able to suppress him in his heart. Shao Qi wasn't arrogant. Rather, it was because many years ago, he had been recognized as the strongest powerhouse of a younger generation in the imperial city and even in Great Chu. In these years, there had been nearly 100 divine realm cultivators that had been defeated by his hands, and none of them were weak. Many people guessed that Shao Qi had at least opened 6 paths to the divine realm. That was why he could have such formidable strength even without entering the divine realm. The reason he was suppressing himself and delaying opening the Heaven and Earth Dragon Gate to enter the divine realm was because he had a grand plan. He wanted to wait for the divine seal Saint Stone to descend and open more paths to the divine realm in one fell swoop. This would increase his chances of breaking into the original God realm in the future. That's right, Shao Qi's goal had been the original God realm for many years. To him, the divine realm was just a transition, and today was the most important moment for Shao Qi. He didn't mind standing side by side with Li Hongye and Ma Yuan. This was because as long as he stood in the front, he would receive the most attention from the Saint Stone. But now, Qin Yu obviously wanted to surpass all of them and become the one in the front. Shao Qi couldn't accept this. He couldn't accept it. He wouldn't allow the opportunity he had waited for hundreds of years to have any changes or imperfections. Li Hongye admitted defeat. Even though Elder Tang Yi of Myriad Swords Mountain had come forward on her behalf, it showed that she was willing to lower her head and not stop Qin Yu. Ma Yuan had an indifferent personality and rarely fought with others. In addition, with Li Hongye's tacit approval, it was reasonable that she didn't fight. But what about him? Shao Qi glanced behind him. Ding Hao was expressionless. He was staring at the smooth stone floor under his feet as if he wanted to see flowers on it. As an opponent of many years, Even though he was one step ahead, Xiao Qi knew better than most people that Ding Hao's unrestrained behavior and indulgence in love with women were just for the sake of cultivation. Ding Hao was definitely his strongest opponent. Whether it was now or in the future, such a Ding Hao was undoubtedly arrogant. He even tacitly approved that Qin Yu was ahead of him. This was what Xiao Qi was concerned about. Among the four great families of the imperial city, the Xiao family controlled the heavenly punishment department. As the recognized future leader of the Xiao family, Xiao Qi had enough authority to read all the information he was interested in. Therefore, Xiao Qi knew clearly that Ding Hao and Qin Yu had met before. They even had some confrontations that the outside world didn't know about. The reason was simple. Lei Xiaoyu's eyes were looking at Qin Yu. No one was stupid. Of course, they knew it. Xiao Qi took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Then, he glanced around and said faintly, "You guys are willing to step back, but I want to fight for it. After all, the first in the sequence will receive the most attention from the Saint Stone." As he finished speaking, he took a step forward. The altar outside the Heaven's Pivot was where the Divine Seal's Saint Stone would descend. Being 1,000 feet away from the altar was the publicly recognized closest distance for the Divine Seal's Saint Stone to descend. Any closer, and there would be suspicions of being too greedy or being disrespectful to the Saint Stone. But today, whether it was Qin Yu or Xiao Lin, who was only one step behind, they both quickly stepped within 1,000 feet. Moreover, their footsteps didn't stop. Countless cultivators widened their eyes. Their eyes were filled with shock and awe. Although they had never personally approached the Divine Seal's Saint Stone, the records that had been passed down for countless years clearly stated that any cultivator that approached within 1,000 feet would have to bear the pressure of the Divine Seal's Saint Stone. This pressure was something that not even Divine Realm cultivators could easily withstand, and the further they went, the stronger the pressure became. Simply put, with every step they took, the pressure they had to withstand would at least double. But now, whether it was Qin Yu or Xiao Qi, their footsteps were steady and firm, without the slightest hesitation. Just how strong were these two people? Xiao Qi's strength was already known to all. Thus, everyone's eyes were focused on Qin Yu. In the past, no matter how strong he was, only his battle with the Heaven Pivot Divine Realm expert could be verified. As for Li Hongye's admission of defeat, although everyone subconsciously felt that Qin Yu was even more unfathomable, they didn't clearly measure it. But today, they finally knew Qin Yu's true strength. Even when facing Xiao Qi, the #1 powerhouse of Great Chu's younger generation, he still wouldn't be at a disadvantage. No, he had already gained the upper hand. Although Xiao Qi's footsteps hadn't stopped, his speed had clearly decreased. His face was pale, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Currently, he was still 400 feet away from the altar. Being able to reach this point was already an unprecedented achievement in the records of the Divine Seal's Saint Stone. This was enough to prove his strength. But unfortunately, such a dazzling performance was like a star beside the bright moon. Although it was incomparably bright, it was destined to be completely overshadowed and not receive the slightest bit of attention. This was because Qin Yu was stronger than him. He continued forward. Just like before, he didn't seem to feel the pressure from the Divine Seal's Saint Stone at all. At this moment, countless people groaned inwardly. Just where did this monster come from? When he was 350 feet away from the altar, Xiao Qi forcefully suppressed the shivering of his legs. His eyes were filled with anger, but there was also a trace of bewilderment mixed in with unwillingness. He had reached his limit, but Qin Yu was still moving forwards. He was clearly only a few steps behind, but in Xiao Qi's mind, it was like an insurmountable chasm. Perhaps in this life, he would never be able to surpass Qin Yu. Chapter 940. Lei Xiaoyu subconsciously raised her head with a proud look on her face. Big brother Qin, whom she had taken a fancy to, was just that outstanding. What cultivation geniuses of the imperial city. When my big brother Qin keeps a low profile, all of you can still jump around. But once he gets serious, I'll make all of you understand what it means to eat dirt. At this time, the little girl's thoughts were running wild. Her eyes shined as she watched Qin Yu continue walking towards the altar. Then, she suddenly sighed. Originally, Big Brother Qin was already very eye-catching. Today, it was refreshed once again. The upper limit of the word, eye-catching, would probably attract even more love-struck women. Ding Hao looked at Qin Yu and then at the emotional Lei Xiaoyu. His heart ached. He had absolute confidence in himself. But now, in a situation where Qin Yu didn't target him in the slightest, his confidence had been shattered to pieces. Li Hongye let out a light breath. Her teacher was right. Qin Yu was far more powerful than she was. If she fought with him now, there was no chance of victory. However, her eyes were filled with determination. She did not feel fear or retreat because of the scene before her. It was even to the extent that the thoughts in her heart grew even firmer. Qin Yu, you're stronger now indeed, but once I break through into the God rank realm, I might be able to fight you. I will defeat you, I will. At this moment, Mo Yuan's expression was calmer than those around her. She only stared at Qin Yu, her gaze constantly overlapping with the figure in her memories. This familiar feeling became increasingly thick. She steeled her resolve. Once today's matters were over, she would go and find Qin Yu to confirm her suspicions. If it really is him, Mo Yuan pursed her lips and suppressed the sudden panic in her mind. Qin Yu was well aware that at this moment he had become the focus of everyone's attention. But he didn't have the energy to care about the shock, envy, awe, and jealousy in these eyes. All of their attention was on the altar on the ground, or to be more precise, they were looking at the jade egg fragment that descended from the foreign realm. There was a point that needed to be made clear here. Qin Yu's strength was at most equal to Shao Qi's. If he excluded his hidden cards, he might even be a bit weaker. The reason why he was able to continue forward was because of the pressure exerted on Shao Qi's body. With every step he took, he felt as if he was carrying a mountain on his back. From start to finish, he didn't feel anything at all. That's right, it was like this. If he wanted to, he could simply take a step and fly up the altar. He was very anxious in his heart, but in the end, his rationality suppressed his impulse. If he really did that, it would definitely be a big problem. So, step by step, Qin Yu maintained his initial rhythm and did his best to appear as ordinary as possible. However, what he didn't know was that his performance had already shocked all of the cultivators in Heaven's Pivot. Among them, there were even 3 grand stargazers with incomparably powerful strength who were at the peak of divine Tao. Gao Xian's pupil shrank. He originally thought that after Cui Yongji's death, he would value Qin Yu enough. Only now did he realize that he was still far underestimating him. As the Dubby Grand Observatory, he knew better than anyone else how powerful the Divine Seal Saint Stone was. Ordinary immortal state warriors weren't qualified to step within 100 feet of it. Even the best among them could only go another 400 feet. Those at the peak of the God realm might be able to reach 700 feet, but that was almost the limit. Even if they were injured, 800 feet was definitely the highest they could reach. But now, Qin Yu had already stepped in, and he was still moving forwards. The distance between him and the altar would soon shrink to 100 feet. How could this be? Even with Grand Stargazer's strong willpower, his heart couldn't help but tremble. This person is Qin Yu? Peng Yin slowly asked. Another Grand Stargazer looked over. Gao Xian took a deep breath and nodded without expression. Peng Yin didn't speak again. Although the 3 Grand Stargazers didn't lose their composure on the surface, only they knew just how shaken they were in their hearts. Even for them, it was impossible for them to step within 100 feet of the altar. After today's grand meeting, invite Qin Yu to come in the name of Heaven's Pivot, and say that because of Cui Yongji, he must give Rock City an explanation. Peng Yin slowly said. Gao Xian and the other Grand Stargazer immediately understood. Because of Qin Yu's performance today, the matter of him flipping over Heaven's Pivot's face could be considered forgotten. Although this was realistic, it was certainly the best choice. A junior that hadn't even stepped into the God realm was actually able to step within 100 feet of the altar. Disregarding everything else, Just this point alone was enough for Heaven's pivot to avoid becoming enemies with him. But the problem was that Qin Yu's goal from the moment he took his first step wasn't to approach the altar. What he truly wanted to approach was the descending fetal egg fragment above the altar. 10 breaths of time later, when everyone was holding their breath and the world was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop, Qin Yu took a single step and stood in front of the altar. If they hadn't witnessed this scene with their own eyes, no one would have believed it. But this was undoubtedly the truth. At this time, after a brief silence, Qin Yu looked up. Everyone's hearts shrank and their minds went blank. There was only a single thought left in their minds. What was he doing? Then, Qin Yu gave them an answer. He was going to climb up the steps. He was going to step onto the altar. Bang! It was like a bolt of thunder exploding in everyone's minds. Even Lei Xiaoyu, who was filled with confidence in Qin Yu and believed he was omnipotent, subconsciously dropped her jaw, much less the other cultivators. Everyone's vision turned blank. All that was left was Qin Yu's silently climbing back. Am I hallucinating? Or has he gone crazy? Or has the world become absurd and ridiculous? Qin Yu stepped onto the altar. He actually wanted to step onto the altar. Ever since the founding of the Great Chu Empire, there had been records of the descent of the divine seal Saint Stone. Besides today, this had only happened once. The first person to attempt to step onto the altar was the founding emperor of the Great Chu Empire, one of the strongest powerhouses in the world, Chu Luhai. In the ancient texts, it was recorded that the founding emperor wanted to step onto the altar and collect the divine stone that fell from the heavens. Halfway up, his face turned white and he vomited blood halfway. In the end, he gave up and never tried again. To put it simply, when the first emperor of the Chu Empire reached 3/4 of the way up the altar, he vomited blood and retreated. Afterwards, he didn't dare to try again. This matter was widely spread throughout the Great Chu Empire. Although not everyone knew about it, every cultivator that had the qualifications to come to Heaven's pivot today was well aware of it. This could also explain why their hearts shook so much when Qin Yu stepped onto the altar. And in fact, when Qin Yu took his first step onto the altar, the attention gathered here was no longer limited to just Heaven's pivot. The 3 grand stargazers could clearly feel the boundless divine senses that descended upon them. If this were any other day, then this would be regarded as a provocation and disrespect towards Heaven's pivot. The 3 grand stargazers would definitely warn him. But now, they maintained their silence. This wasn't just because the most powerful divine sense came from the deepest depths of the underground palace, but also because the 3 grand stargazers were well aware that Qin Yu's performance today was no longer something that Heaven's pivot could control. Everyone could feel the powerful divine wills in the sky. They were as vast as the sea, able to drown and destroy everything in the blink of an eye. As they looked at Qin Yu's figure, the envy in everyone's eyes faded by over half. To step onto the altar and rely on his own strength, to shake the entire imperial city and cause the divine senses of countless great figures to descend upon him. This already surpassed their imaginations. Humans might be jealous, but those stronger than them absolutely wouldn't release these emotions towards the stars in the skies. It was just like how ants on the ground would never view a great eagle that soared through the highest heavens as their natural enemy. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Qin Yu's expression was calm, but a cold sweat dripped down his back. As he thought, even though he had been careful enough, he had still completely blown up the situation. The limelight today was far too great. If he wasn't careful, he would be sucked in and instantly torn to pieces. Even so, Qin Yu wouldn't stop, nor would he turn back. He had to take away this jade egg fragment, because its pride was that of a star in the heavens. Even if it was broken and destroyed, it shouldn't fall into the dust and become a cultivation tool for others. This was the first time that the jade egg had so intensely transmitted its will to Qin Yu, and this was what he was thinking. This was because the jade egg was him, and he was the jade egg. From the day they fused together, the two of them were one. There was no distinction between you and me. With this thought in mind, the sun and moon force fields spread out, wrapping around Qin Yu. Thus, his connection to the world was instantly severed. The pressure from the outside world completely vanished. Chinyu took a deep breath, and his steps became even firmer. At this moment, all the boundless divine senses were shocked. They were sure that Chinyu was still above the altar, and they could clearly see him, but they couldn't lock onto his aura. It was as if what appeared in front of him was a shadow. A shadow? This was a bit like the aura of the vortex channel before the jade egg descended. Thinking about it, after Chinyu stepped onto the altar, he had reached a certain position and obtained the altar's approval. Otherwise, it couldn't explain the sudden arrival of this force that separated him from the others. Boundless divine senses came from all over the imperial city. Even the founding emperor, who hadn't appeared in front of others for many years, couldn't help but reveal a look of envy in his heart. Even to this day, no one had truly investigated what the divine seal Saint Stone was. But no one doubted its strength and might. It was an existence that not even an original God realm expert could approach. Their aura would suppress them to the point of making them weep blood. And now, Chinyu had actually obtained its approval. Countless thoughts crossed the minds of the elders. They all had their own thoughts, but as to what they should do next, that all depended on Chinyu's final harvest. If everything was his, then they would naturally laugh and use their own methods to win him over. They couldn't let him leave like this. Taking a step back, if everything wasn't his, then they would just laugh and use their own methods. But the results would be completely different. Chinyu stood firm. There were no more stone steps in front of him. In other words, he had stepped onto the altar. In front of him was the jade egg fragment. As Chinyu looked at it, he could feel the excitement it was emitting. "I'll bring you home." Chapter 941. When Chinyu's fingers touched the jade embryo egg fragment, there was a sigh of satisfaction and relief in his heart. It was like a lonely sailboat drifting in the sea. It had long been scarred and exhausted, and now it had finally found its home. Then, the embryo egg fragment began to release light. Without hesitation, it began to burn the last of its energy. In the next moment, the invisible shackles that blocked off the aura around Dubhe instantly collapsed. Trillions of beams of light shot out in all directions. These beams of light rubbed against the rules of the world, producing an incredible reaction that turned into 3,000 rainbow bridges that crossed the heavens. The great imperial city fell deathly silent. Everyone's eyes widened, their faces filled with disbelief. Then, this shock turned into endless ecstasy. All cultivators that hadn't entered the divinity realm saw this 3,000 rainbow bridge. Their minds rumbled, and countless comprehensions appeared in their hearts. This is the reflection of the great Tao from the divine seal Saint Stone. When we look at this rainbow bridge, it is the same as looking directly at the great Tao. There is no longer any obstruction. Good fortune, great good fortune. 3,000 rainbow bridges, 3,000 great Taos, crossing the skies of the imperial city. This is the Saint Stone's gift to everyone. I only glanced at it, and the bottleneck of the withered soul saber art has loosened. If I meditate on it for a little longer, I will definitely make a breakthrough. Before this person finished speaking, there was a sudden fluctuation of aura. A cultivator stood still, the aura around him tumbling like a tide. He had broken through. The cultivator that cultivated the withered soul saber art revealed a look of envy. He immediately sat down cross-legged and entered into a state of cultivation. And this was an extremely ordinary scene on the countless streets of the vast imperial city. This was because at this moment, after receiving enlightenment from the 3,000 rainbow bridges, at least several hundred cultivators had simultaneously opened their paths to the divinity realm. Even in the imperial city of the Great Shu, where there were countless powerhouses, such a breathtaking scene had never appeared before. For a time, the skies above the imperial city changed colors. Tumbling black clouds gushed out from nothingness, weaving together into a pitch-black curtain that darkened the skies. There were too many cultivators opening their paths to the divinity realm, causing the world to change. From the looks of it, It seemed that thunder tribulation was about to descend. At this time, from deep within the imperial palace, the phantom of a giant hand shot up into the skies. The 5 fingers grasped the air and tore apart the curtain that covered the skies. Strange fluctuations appeared in the world and then quickly dissipated. Great Chu's first emperor had taken action. The power of the original God realm was really intimidating. Even the will of heaven and earth could disperse it. Even though he had been in closed-door training for many years and did not pay attention to the affairs of the outside world, he was still the founding emperor of the Great Chu country. Every immortal realm expert in the country would make the Chu country stronger. Naturally, he would not allow the natural phenomenon to interfere with this. In the extreme monarch hall in the center of the Arch Palace, the founding emperor, who was hidden in the shadows, frowned slightly. He also didn't know what had happened, but without a doubt, the reason why the divine seal Saint Stone had changed was because of Qinyu. Exactly what secrets is this junior hiding? Not only could he ascend the altar, but he could also summon 3,000 rainbow lights to illuminate the imperial city. With a deep gaze, the founding emperor glanced at Dubhe and then closed his eyes. He was also waiting for today's result. 40 meters away from the altar, Shaoqi's eyes widened as he stared at the rainbow bridge in the sky. His face was flushed red with excitement. He didn't doubt in the slightest that he would surely be able to break through today, and it was even to the extent that he would be able to open up the 8th path to the God rank realm. Once he completed it, he would have at least a 60% chance of breaking through to the original God realm. All of the haze in his heart was swept away. Shaoqi sat down cross-legged, his entire mind immersed in cultivation. At the same time, Li Hongye, Mo Yuan, and the others all had their own harvests. At this moment, besides several peak existences, no one had any thoughts of paying attention to Qinyu. There were 3,000 rainbow bridges in the imperial city, each one a great Tao. It was just that at this time, including the founding emperor of Great Chu, no one could imagine that the great Tao that had evolved into the imperial city's 3,000 great Taos was only caused by the energy that the embryo egg fragment had poured into Qinyu's body. At most, it could only account for 10%. Just this 10% was enough to give the 10 million cultivators in the imperial city who had yet to enter the deity realm a heaven-shaking good fortune. Even if a deity realm cultivator looked at the 3,000 rainbow bridges, they would still have great harvests. Then what would happen if it was 90%? Unfortunately, Qinyu didn't know. This was because right now, the energy that the embryo egg fragment had poured into his body was being absorbed by the jade embryo egg. He was only acting as a transit point. Luckily, Qinyu was only acting as a transit point. Otherwise, with this tremendous strength, he would instantly explode. Now, Qinyu felt incomparably sour. He could only grit his teeth and endure it. He couldn't even think about it. Bang, bang. Within the range of the imperial city, auras erupted one after another. This meant that another person had opened up their road to the deity realm. As long as they wanted to, they could knock open the heaven and earth dragon gate at any time and ascend to the next level of life. A rough calculation showed that since the appearance of the 3,000 rainbow bridges, there had been at least 10,000 cultivators that had accomplished this. Suddenly, Shaoqi's eyes flashed open. Joy flashed in his eyes, and the aura around him suddenly changed. It didn't continue to grow stronger. Instead, it became a little more restrained than before. But the aura around him was already complete, as if he were a fish that had leapt through the dragon gate. At this time, he had smoothly opened up his 7th road to the deity realm, and it was publicly acknowledged that in order to attack the original divinity realm, one needed to reach the deity realm with the glory of 7 divine seals. Shaoqi took a deep breath, suppressing his surging emotions. He looked up at Qinyu's back atop the altar. He couldn't stop. He had to continue. If he could open up his 8th road to the deity realm, his future was destined to be bright and resplendent. So what if it was Qinyu today? As for who would have the last laugh, that was still unknown. Bang! At this time, 3 auras erupted from behind him. Li Hongye's eyes were closed and motionless. Sword intent pulsed around her, and tiny cracks would occasionally appear in the space around her. It was like a pair of open and closed eyes. They were as dark as an abyss, causing one's heart to race. Mo Yuan was wrapped in light, giving off a feeling as if she would fuse into it. Every strand of her hair was shining, pure, transparent, and bright, able to dispel all shadows in the world. Ning Hao's expression was solemn. His originally white robes had quietly turned into a deep and pure darkness. Faintly, as one looked at the changing black robes, they felt their souls shiver, as if they would be pulled out from their bodies. Those who could be recognized as standing closest to the altar were all cultivation geniuses. Once again, they used facts to tell everyone that they were truly powerful. They made the same choice as Shao-Chi. After the three of them made their breakthroughs, they didn't delay at all. They continued to perceive the vault of heaven's rainbow bridge, trying to brand its existence into their minds. This was because it was clear that the divine seal Saint Stone was in an abnormal state today. It should have lasted for 24 hours, but now it had descended for a full day and night. No one was willing to waste even a single breath of time. Lei Xiaoyu was an exception. Although she could feel the true meaning of thunder within the 3,000 rainbow bridges and her bloodline was constantly strengthening, she didn't pour all of her attention into it. She looked at the altar at the forgotten Qinyu. Deep in her eyes, she revealed a look of worry. The momentum that Big Brother Qin had created today was far too great. She feared there would be future troubles. Even if she represented Rock City, it would be useless. Why was this happening? She understood that Qinyu was wise, calm, and self-restrained. He did things with a goal in mind and shouldn't be so impulsive. He knew that as long as he stepped onto the altar, he would become the target of public criticism. Moreover, the divine seal Saint Stone had undergone such a change. Big Brother Qin, just what are you doing? For hours later, the 3,000 rainbow bridges that spanned across the horizon of the imperial city and illuminated the world vanished without warning. Qinyu's body trembled, and he was forced back by an invisible strength. His face paled as he fell to his knees and spat out a mouthful of blood. He looked up, a complex look in his eyes. He watched as the divine seal, Saint Stone, shot into the skies and howled into the vortex in the skies, vanishing from sight. In the next moment, the vortex vanished and the channel closed. But Qinyu knew that the records of the divine seal Saint Stone descending in this world would never appear again. This was because it had exhausted all of its strength. The only thing that kept it going was the last bit of its remaining strength. If everything went according to plan, once it returned to this different world, it would be annihilated into powder. Perhaps this was already happening. Qinyu's heart shrank, and sorrow filled his mind. He pursed his lips. He knew that the final trace left behind in this world by Senior Supreme Elder who had once traveled with him had completely vanished. And even now, he didn't know the name or true appearance of this senior. This was the cruel and merciless nature of the cultivation world. No matter how strong you were, as long as you died and turned to ash, everything would turn to nothing. At this time, Qinyu was thinking that if there came a day in the future when he would also find it hard to escape death, then out of the trillions of lives in this world, just who would know his name? Shua. Shao-Chi opened his eyes and clenched his fists. He couldn't suppress the excitement on his face. Although he hadn't been able to smoothly open the 8th road to the divine realm, he had grasped the key to success. All that was left was to slowly grind away. If everything went smoothly, he would be able to take this step in at most 10 years. The glory of 8 divine seals. This was currently the highest known boundary in the divine realm. The future original God realm was just around the corner. For countless years, Shao-Chi had been regarded as a cultivation genius. He had been arrogant and willful, but in the end, all of this had turned into a powerful pressure. He was already used to being an eagle that soared through the highest heavens. He looked down at the earth and at those gazes that looked up to him with awe. He would never allow himself to be beaten down to the ground in the future and suffer those pitiful and mocking gazes. This was because Shao Qi had personally witnessed similar things happen more than once. The juniors of great families were born with a golden spoon in their mouths and obtained resources far more easily than the average person. But they also had to bear more responsibility and were callous. But after today, Shao Qi no longer needed to be as nervous as he was in the past. He could bring out his proudest attitude and face anyone. This was because he was destined to be powerful. He looked up at Qin Yu's distressed appearance and felt his aura. After a brief pause, Shao Qi revealed a carefree smile. A forsaken saint. He was actually a forsaken saint. The so-called forsaken saint was a strange existence that appeared after being bathed in the power of the divine seal, Saint Stone, for many years. They weren't approved by the Saint Stone, so they couldn't use its strength to sense traces of the great Tao. In fact, because they were rejected by the Saint Stone, they would suffer damage. Chapter 942. At this time, it wasn't just Shao Qi who noticed Qin Yu's condition. Li Hongye furrowed her eyebrows before she composed herself. Deep in her eyes, a trace of disappointment flashed. That's right, disappointment. Today after today, there would no longer be any barriers to her divine realm great Tao. She would be able to reach her most ideal state. Her sword intent circulated, illuminating the world. A single sword strike could chill the highest heavens and shake the world. One beneath the 3,000 rainbow bridges, facing the great Tao, the sword fanatic's harvests were even greater than Shao Qi's. She, at this time, her aura was restrained and the sword intent within her seemed empty. But with a casual stroke of her hand, she could release a boundless might. If Li Hongye wanted to, she could break into the divine realm at any time. Before this, she only had one thought in her mind, to fight with Qin Yu. But now there was no need for that. As a forsaken saint, missing out on the lucky chance of the 3,000 great Tao wasn't just a stroke of good fortune. It also represented sinking into depravity. Or perhaps the current Qin Yu was an existence that ordinary cultivators of his generation could only look up to. But in Li Hongye's eyes, he had already been cast far away. Today's disparity could never be made up for. Silence, a complex look appeared in Mo Yuan's eyes. She wanted to say something, but she didn't know where she stood. A forsaken saint. How could he be a forsaken saint? Was it because his previous performance was too dazzling? This time, more and more people looked at Qin Yu through the eyes of Shao Qi, Li Hongye, and Mo Yuan. Short after a brief shock, similar thoughts appeared in their minds. Then, they all silently mourned for Qin Yu. What was this? Was he sacrificing himself to help everyone? God, the change in the Saint Seal Stone was inevitably related to Qin Yu ascending the altar and touching it. But he hadn't obtained any benefits from it. This was the greatest tragedy in the world. Lei Xiaoyu took a deep breath. She suddenly walked forwards. As she did, the altar retracted into the ground and vanished from sight. Qin Yu looked at her. The corners of his lips moved, revealing a faint smile. He was exhausted to the extreme. Thus, when his smile fell into Lei Xiaoyu's eyes, it seemed forced. Her heart ached. She squeezed out a smile. Big brother Qin, let's go. He allowed Lei Xiaoyu to support him. Qin Yu's thoughts stirred, and he guessed what she was thinking. Warmth rippled in her heart, dispelling the last trace of sadness. She nodded and said, "All right, let's go." As he walked out of the Dubhi gate, Shao Qi's carefree laughter suddenly rang out behind him. He was in high spirits, and his posture was ostentatious. As he laughed, the powerful aura around him moved, causing the expressions of everyone present to change. Young Master, Shao has improved again today. Your future accomplishments are limitless. We congratulate you. Soon, young Master Zhao's name will spread throughout my great Chu. Congratulations to young Master Shao. Shao Qi laughed even louder. Good. Today, I'm hosting a banquet in outside Pavilion Restaurant. All the fellow Taoists present can come. Let's toast and celebrate our harvest. His laughter faded. Of course, in order to help you and me comprehend the great Tao, I didn't hesitate to injure myself. Fellow Taoist Qin Yu is so righteous, so come and drink a cup of wine so that I can express my thanks. Xiao Yu was so angry that his face turned red. You pulled her back and glanced at Shao Qi. He said indifferently, I appreciate young Master Zhao's kind intentions. However, my injuries have yet to recover, so I won't disturb you any longer today. With that, he left. Whoosh! With the cry of a sword, Li Hongye vanished from sight. The divine senses that wove together in the skies revealed looks of praise. It turned out that the one with the greatest harvest today was this girl. The Li family now had a successor. They would be able to maintain their wealth for the next 10,000 years. This was truly enviable. Silence Yuan and Ding Hao also fell into their eyes. Perhaps they hadn't revealed strength as amazing as Shao Qi and Li Hongye, but after being baptized by the 3,000 great Daos, their futures were bright. Short in 100 years, or at most 1,000 years, the Great Chu Empire would welcome the birth of a new batch of peak powerhouses. This was a fortunate event for the empire. As for Qin Yu, no matter how shocking his performance was before, it no longer mattered now. As existences that truly stood at the peak of this ancient empire, they had the qualifications to know even deeper secrets. A forsaken saint, it wasn't as simple as being rejected by the divine seal Saint Stone and not being able to obtain any harvests. The injuries they suffered contained the terrifying might of the Saint Stone, and they would never be able to recover in their entire lives. Also, in other words, no matter how outstanding Qin Yu was in the past, or how great his potential was, he was now a cripple. Such a junior no longer had the qualifications to attract their attention. Emperor in the Imperial Palace's extreme Imperial Palace, the founding emperor revealed a disappointed look in his eyes. A certain thought vanished with it. Qin Yu boarded the carriage and slowly drove away from Heaven's Pivot. He didn't know that he had already avoided a terrifying slaughter that would have left him with no chance of survival. Sweeping his eyes around, he could see the countless cultivators on the street. He closed his eyes, a calm expression on his face. It seemed that no one noticed anything wrong. To Qin Yu, this was naturally the best result. Otherwise, he didn't doubt that once the embryo egg fragment left, what awaited him would be the fate of being killed without hesitation. After all, when embryo egg fragment strength dissipated, it condensed into the 3,000 rainbow bridges that helped the millions of cultivators in the imperial city face the great Tao. A single person occupied 90%. Who could imagine such a harvest? The journey was smooth. They returned to the Lei family's residence in the imperial city. News of what occurred at Heaven's Pivot had already spread. Only Hong's attitude was still respectful, but his expression became incomparably complex. He never imagined that things would turn out like this. Yesterday, Qin Yu had been regarded as inconceivably powerful, but in the blink of an eye he had fallen to this point. Qin Yu waved his hand to stop Lei Xiaoyu from following. He said, I want to be alone for some time. You've obtained a great harvest today, so go into seclusion and cultivate. Lei Xiaoyu bit her lips. Big brother Qin Yu smiled. Don't worry, I'm really fine. Listen to me. She didn't want to agree, but looking at his forced smile, she nodded. Watching her leave, Qin Yu turned and returned to his room. He sat down on a chair and let out a breath. Come out. Xiang Shui's figure emerged from the shadows. When she agreed to help Divine Dr. Yi, she should have obtained some benefits. Recently, her aura had become increasingly obscure. If it weren't for Qin Yu's eyes having the ability to see through all illusions, it would have been nearly impossible to sense her existence. Xiang Shui had a serious expression. She looked him up and down and curled her lips. I knew that no matter who was unlucky, you wouldn't be. Is today's matter so simple? Qin Yu didn't hide anything. He nodded. I did obtain some harvests, but it's true that I was injured. You already know the answer, so hurry up and leave. I need a rest. Xiang Shui coldly sneered. Your brain is the best. I'm afraid you've already made up your mind to use this chance to rid yourself of the attention of those in the imperial city. She turned and walked out. The sneer on her face faded, and the corners of her lips curled up in a mocking smile. She really wanted to see the expressions of those people that believed Qin Yu was ruined. One day, when they saw his true harvests, just what sort of marvelous expressions would they have? Did Qin Yu say that he had obtained some harvests? Xiang Shui didn't believe a single word of it. If there weren't great benefits, then with Qin Yu's temperament, why would he go through so much trouble? Why would he cause such an earth-shattering commotion? I'm smart. You want to lie to me? No. Door. Watching Xiang Shui disappear into the shadows, Qin Yu shook his head and smiled. He also guessed that she wouldn't believe his words. But Qin Yu wouldn't tell anyone the truth. With a thought, the sun and moon force fields spread out, wrapping around the room and isolating it from the outside world. Qin Yu lifted a hand and placed a finger between his eyebrows. He said in a soft voice, "Now, you should let me know just what the fragment brought me." A tremor erupted from the depths of his soul. It was like a trillion sparks were ignited at the same time, creating a grand display of fireworks in Qin Yu's mind. Every fireball represented a great Tao. There were far too many of them, so they could only be tightly packed together. Otherwise, any one of them could turn into a rainbow bridge that pierced through the endless skies. And moreover, what was most shocking was that all of these fireworks were blooming for Qin Yu alone. After sitting down cross-legged for a long time, Qin Yu took back his finger from between his eyebrows and let out a satisfied sigh. Before his voice fell, the aura around him changed. At this moment, he had thoroughly comprehended the great Tao, and the fourth road of the divine realm had been opened. But now, there wasn't much joy on his face. This was because he had witnessed the vastness of the heavens. So what if there were stars in the mortal world? How could they shake his mind? Vast to shake the heavens and earth. There were actually such mysteries. The trillion great Taos were like the stars in the heavens. How many could one comprehend in a lifetime? Luckily, Qin Yu had already leapt out from the mortal world. Although his strength was low, he had the qualifications to glimpse into the vast, great Tao of the world. After a long time, Qin Yu stood up. He cupped his hands together and bowed deeply. "Senior, I do not know your name, nor do I know who your enemies are. But I have inherited the shadow of your great Tao and will do my best to make it shine once more. I will not disappoint your efforts." A moment later, Dan Hong reported that Qin Yu had announced that he was going into seclusion and that no one was to disturb him. Lei Xiaoyu revealed a worried expression. She thought for a moment and nodded. "I understand." She glanced at him. "Big Brother Qin has saved my life. No matter what changes occur, he will always be the most important person to me. Do you understand?" Dan Hong hurriedly said, "Miss, rest assured that no one in the mansion would dare to show any disrespect to Mr. Qin. You may leave." Dan Hong stood up and left, beads of sweat covering his forehead. When Lei Xiaoyu spoke just now, he had felt an indescribable, suffocating pressure. And this feeling was something he had felt many years ago from the City Lord. "Look, the Divine Seal Saint Stone has undergone a mutation. The mist has also obtained a great harvest." Thinking of Lei Xiaoyu's warning, Dan Hong warned himself that no matter what, he could not neglect Qin Yu in the slightest. He had risen like a comet and fallen like a comet. Qin Yu's dazzling light had once illuminated the entire imperial city, leaving countless people in awe, not daring to look at him. But after the matter of heaven's pivot, he had thoroughly vanished from everyone's sight. He was like a spray in a surging river. After a brief moment of brilliance, he disappeared and was forgotten by everyone. Shao Qi, Li Hongye, Mo Yuan, and Ding Hao, these four people had become publicly recognized as the strongest youths of the Chu Empire, attracting the attention of everyone. And Chapter 943. The hall was grand and majestic. The pillars were straight and were pure gold. They supported the roof of the hall. Dragons and phoenixes were carved on them, as well as the figures of many strange beasts. One look at them would make one feel awe. If someone else was here, they would be able to recognize that this hall was the imperial palace at the center of the palace. The two were exactly the same, like reflections in the water. There was no difference. But this was not the palace. Luxury, on the luxurious and majestic dragon throne, There was a figure sitting on it. One of his hands was lightly tapping on the back of the chair, and the other hand was supporting his chin. His eyes occasionally opened and closed, and countless rays of light flashed past. Each ray was as dazzling as the aurora. "The forsaken saints," he muttered softly, his voice leaning towards a neutral tone, revealing a hint of gentleness. "I don't really believe that things are so simple." His voice spread in the hall. Perhaps because it was too empty, even though there was plenty of light, it still felt cold. He stepped out. He took a step forward, and his shadow seemed to separate. One of them walked out of the hall, while the other was still sitting on the throne, gently stretching his waist. "It's best if you bring him back. If you can't, bring his corpse back." "Okay." A single word. The coldness lingered, as if it came from an ancient ice cave. "Emperor. City Thunder Mansion. Close." In Guangzhou, Qinyu opened his eyes and looked forward. His gaze was deep, as if it could penetrate the barriers of space. As expected, things would not end so easily. There would be people probing to see if the result was as they saw. Qinyu had expected this. He raised his eyebrows and then calmed down. "World. How could everything in the world go according to one's will? Since it could not be avoided, then let it come." As for the result, Qinyu could not predict it. But there was one thing he was sure of. Even if the situation completely collapsed, he could still escape from the Imperial City. No wrong, even if there were divine source cultivators in the Imperial City. But not long ago, in Peng City, Qinyu was confident he could escape unscathed when he faced Lei Qianjun, who was at the peak of the divine state. Escape. Escape and escape were two completely different concepts. But they had one thing in common, and that was to survive. This was what he had obtained during his seclusion. Of course, it was more accurate to say that it was a gift from the trillions of great Daos contained within the embryo egg fragment. But this time, Qinyu's eyes flashed, revealing a look of surprise. His tense body slowly relaxed. At the back door of the Lei mansion, Li Hongye stood with a sword in her hand. She had a grim expression as she stared at the figure walking toward her. He wore a plain robe and was of medium height. His facial features could be seen clearly at a glance, but when he tried to recall, there was not the slightest trace left behind. Pupil Kong Waning and Li Hongye raised their hands. The tip of their swords made pff sounds in the air. The figure on the other side paused for a moment before raising his head to look at Li Hongye. With just a single glance, Li Hongye's resolute and penetrating sword heart trembled in fear. Resemblance, the mountains and rivers were overturned. Cultivation isn't easy. Why seek death? Just leave. An ice-cold voice sounded in the air. Li Hongye gripped the hilt of her sword tightly. The slight panic in her heart vanished instantly. She raised her hand, and the tip of her sword stabbed forward without any hesitation. Sword Chi used her actions to give her answer. Once her sword was unsheathed, she would never take it back. Yes. The figure on the other side had a look of admiration in his eyes. He raised his hand and pointed forward. Speed. It wasn't fast, but in an instant, it collided with the tip of the sword. The straight sword instantly twisted, bending into a twisted twist. Li Hongye's face was pale, but her eyes were even brighter. Eh. The figure on the other side let out a surprised sound. He looked down at his chest. His clothes had been torn open and sword energy had touched his flesh. It hurt a little. Although it wasn't much, it was real. For him, just feeling pain was already an incomparably shocking matter. The Li family's sword chi was extraordinary. But that was all. In the air, a terrifying aura erupted, like an awakened beast. Whoosh sword! The sound of a sword cut through the frozen air. One-armed Tang, he appeared next to Li Hongye, shielding her behind him. Shan, Sr. Hongye is a disciple of my Myriad Swords Mountain. I ask that you show mercy. So what if you're from Myriad Swords Mountain? The two of us aren't worth mentioning to Senior. But since my Myriad Swords Mountain has been passed down to this day, there must be a reason. Are you threatening me? Tang, he doesn't dare. But Senior should know that if I and my disciple die today, Myriad Swords Mountain won't let this matter rest. The invisible pressure in the air could crush a person's bones into powder. So after a long time, The figure turned and left. Myriad Swords Mountain's face can only be used once. If you dare to interfere in the future, you will die. Tang Yi respectfully bowed. Thank you, Senior. He suddenly coughed. His face paled and blood flowed out from every orifice of his head. Li Hongye's expression changed. Teacher. Tang Yi lifted a hand. I'm fine. Although his expression was calm, his heart was shaking. He had Li Hongye here because he expected someone to secretly attack Qinyu. First, he wanted to fulfill his promise. Second, he wanted to use this opportunity to improve his relationship with Qinyu. In Tang, he already knew about the change in Guan Tianshu. But he also believed that things wouldn't be so simple. But Tang, he never imagined that Qinyu would draw in such a terrifying existence. This was just an avatar, but it was able to injure him. Its true cultivation must have broken through the limits of the divine realm. Source divinity. Only a being like this would dare to kill the 10,000 Swords Mountain, despite knowing that it was the 10,000 Swords Mountain. That's right. Since Fong had already expressed his attitude that he would kill them the next time they met, he would really kill them. To thus, helping Qinyu block one attack tonight was his limit. Wipe after wiping off the blood stains, Tang, he took a deep breath and glanced at the quiet Lei Manor. Then, he turned around and dragged Li Hongye away. He had done everything he could. What happened in the future would depend on Qin Yu's own good fortune. In the dark sky, the vast clouds roiled like surging waves. The earth was barren. Countless rocks scattered in all directions. Everything was silent, without the least bit of life. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion from the clouds. Billions of bolts of lightning erupted, sweeping out in all directions. Then, in a brief moment, the vast lightning converged and condensed into a bolt of lightning that fell down. It's straight and unbending, like a spear of lightning descending from the heavens. With unbelievable speed, it sank into the earth. Down! In the next moment, there was a loud, rumbling sound from deep underground. The ground cracked, forming a giant crack. Crack the crack continued to expand. 10 miles, 100 miles, 1,000 miles, until it reached 10,000 miles. It was like a giant, gaping wound in the earth, like the gaping maw of a terrifying beast. It roared at the skies, as if it wanted to swallow the heavens. A cold, icy, and deathly silent aura spread out from the crack. The temperature in the air rapidly fell. Snow fell from the sky, sprinkling down onto the ground. In the blink of an eye, it covered the ground. But even though it was snowing heavily, not a single piece fell into the crack in the ground, as if the aura within it terrified the falling snow. Thus, amidst the white snow, the crack in the ground became even more striking. Same for a time. Within the Great Shu's capital's imperial palace, the founding emperor's eyes flashed open. He revealed a trace of fear and hesitation, but in the end it was replaced by anticipation and excitement. Faint in the dark earth, a shadow rose up from the ground, rapidly stretching into the shape of a human. The surface of his body rippled like water. His voice was filled with uncontrollable excitement. Founding Emperor, do you feel it? Everything is as I said. The heaven-eradicating abyss has opened ahead of time. The Founding Emperor let out a deep breath, his eyes cold. You've used your own performance to gain my trust, but this is just the beginning. If at any point in the future I discover that you have ulterior motives, then even if I have to give up on my breakthrough, I will kill you. Shadow didn't care about the threat. He laughed out loud. Of course, my cooperation with the Founding Emperor has been established on the basis that we both benefit from each other. He paused for a moment and continued. If Your Majesty, the Founding Emperor, has no other objections, then our plan will officially begin. The Founding Emperor was silent for a long time. Begin. The shadow faded away. At this moment, no one in the imperial city knew that an undercurrent had already spread through the entire imperial city. No one would be spared. Ding Hao had an excited expression, his eyes filled with excitement. The heaven-eradicating abyss has opened. It has actually opened ahead of time. The heavens are truly helping me. At this time, a voice came from outside the door. Young Master Ding Hao, the old ancestor invites you. After a moment, Ding Hao respectfully bowed. Greetings, old ancestor. The old ancestor of the Ding family was the same as before, his aura weak and dispirited. I will teach you the secret techniques of the Ding family. Prepare to enter seclusion with me. But old ancestor. The old ancestor of the Ding family waved his hand. Then it settled. Go and prepare. Li Red Leaf frowned. Teacher, why is the mountain suddenly summoning me back? Tang, he coughed lightly. The meaning of the mountain is that with your current cultivation, you are qualified to receive the true teachings. I know, but why are you in such a hurry? Tang, he shook his head. I don't know. He turned and left. Go and prepare. We will soon return to the mountain. Mo Ming's expression was solemn as he said lightly, You will comprehend the true meaning of light this time. I will open a secret realm and send you inside to cultivate. You must grasp this opportunity well. Do not become arrogant and complacent. Mo Yuan frowned. Father, Mo Ming raised a hand. I know that you're interested in the heaven-eradicating abyss, but next time. Shao. Qi excitedly stepped through the stone door with an expression of wild joy. With a loud rumble, the cave dwelling was isolated from the outside world. He had obtained the most fundamental secret technique of the Shao family that he dreamed of. This was equivalent to announcing that he would become the future wielder of the Shao family. After this period of seclusion, Shao Qi would break into the divine realm and become one of the peak powerhouses of this world. Good. Perhaps his previous description wasn't too accurate. This was because there were always some people who could sense the yin chill outside of the world of ordinary people and avoid ahead of time. And at this time, the gates of the imperial cities lay residence opened. Qin Yu pulled Lei Xiaoyu onto a carriage and drove towards the city gates. This news caused several ripples in the massive imperial city before quickly vanishing from sight. In their eyes, the forsaken Saint Qin Yu had already been stepped into the abyss. How could he have the qualifications to compete with the proud children of heaven from all over when the heaven-eradicating abyss opened? Perhaps the reason he chose to leave at this time was because of the last bit of pride left in his heart. Deng, however, in the eyes of these people, this pride wasn't worth mentioning at all, because Chapter 944. On the second day after Qin Yu and Lei Xiaoyu left, a theft occurred in the outer tower of the imperial city. It led to a big fight, and even peak God Realm experts were involved. Before the guards of the imperial city arrived, several people were killed on the spot. 1/3 of the luxurious and exquisite outer tower was destroyed. It had been many years since something like this had happened. The people of the imperial city, who liked to be lively, surrounded the outer tower. They were waiting to see those outsiders who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth pay the price for their reckless and impudent actions. The imperial city of the Great Chu was the place where the Son of Heaven lived. How could they be so impudent? Facts proved that the troublemakers that the guards had suppressed were all outsiders. Facing the strongest guards of the imperial city, they had chosen to resist. This made the people of the imperial city gawk. They cursed them in their hearts, calling them fools. At the same time, they sentenced them to death. Anyone who dared to fight against the guards of the imperial city, no matter how strong their background was or what their identity was, would die. This was one of the iron rules of the Great Chu Empire that couldn't be violated. It was because the guards of the imperial city represented the dignity of the Great Chu imperial family. They wouldn't allow any provocation. For a time, heads rolled. So what if they were peak God Realm experts? The imperial city guards were the vassals of the emperor clans. They were known to have 1/10 of the hotshots in the world. The emperor clans had used cruel means to show their power one more time. This matter should have ended like this. It should have become a topic for the people of the imperial city to talk about and then be slowly forgotten. However, as the head rolled down, a piece of news spread out. An original God Realm corpse was found in the despairing heaven abyss. It still had the origin that hadn't scattered yet. Whoever could get it could reach the sky in just one step entering the original God realm directly. In the eyes of most people with a bit of brains, this news was very unreliable. However, the series of events that followed caused their eyes to gradually reveal a burning desire. The theft case in the outer tower and the subsequent killings were all because of the original god's origin. Someone had found the original god's corpse in the heavenly, eradicating abyss. Although he was killed, he had left some clues. Soon, this matter was confirmed. At least 70% of the news about the original god's origin was credible. It was enough. It should be known that even someone as arrogant as Shao Qi, who had opened 8 paths to the God realm, wasn't sure he could break through to the original God realm smoothly. However, if he could collect the original God origin on this basis, he would be 90% sure. In this world, there are more than tens of thousands of cultivators who wanted to reach the original God realm. With the Imperial City as the center, a wave of scorching heat spread out and gradually covered the entire Great Chu territory. There were as many cultivators in the world as there were carps in the river. Those who could break through to the God realm were the best of the best. Among the God realm, those who had the qualifications, confidence, and ambition to reach the peak of the world and step into the divine source realm were even rarer. They were unwilling to accept that their cultivation would stop at this level. Even if there was only a sliver of hope, they would not hesitate to grasp it tightly. So what if it was the sky eradicating abyss? Li Hongye's eyes brightened. Her sword was surged. Original God, origin. In silence, she took a step forward. The space in front of her suddenly cracked, and she stepped into the crack and disappeared. After a while, Tang Yi hurried over. There was no response to his call, and he directly barged in. His gaze swept across the empty sword cultivation room, and his expression changed drastically. As expected, this girl already knew. Tang Yi took a deep breath. Not daring to delay any longer, he quickly turned and left. He did not know what would happen in the sky eradicating abyss, but it would definitely be extremely dangerous. Tang Yi would not allow anything to happen to Li Hongye. Her future was bright, not just the future of 10,000 Swords Mountain, but also the greatest pride of his life. He hurriedly sent a message to the mountain to negotiate with the imperial clans. Tang Yi left the imperial city and soared into the sky, disappearing after a sword chime. "My lord, we found Mrs. Letter. She has already gone to the sky, eradicating abyss." A light garb out. Mo Ming was silent for a moment, then stood up and walked outside. In this world, he only had one daughter left. He would not let her be in danger. For this, Mo Ming was willing to pay a price to exchange with the imperial palace. The old forefather of the Ding family was furious. Everyone trembled. Ding Hao had left the imperial city without saying goodbye. Even though his whereabouts were unknown, everyone could guess where he had gone. The Taoist said calmly, "It is the fortune of the Ding clan that one of their descendants possesses such will and courage." The old forefather of the Ding family shook his head. "In the past, I would indeed be gratified, but you should know that the sky eradicating abyss has opened." He was silent for a few breaths, then suddenly stood up. The Taoist furrowed his eyebrows. "Old Ding?" The old forefather of the Ding family waved his hand. "As you say, Ding Hao is the junior that I favor the most in the future. I cannot allow him to die like this. It has been many years since you have entered the imperial palace. Let me go in your place." The old forefather said, "This time, you do not have enough weight." No one knew what sort of game was being played between the peak influences of the Great Chu, including the imperial clans. News of the sky eradicating abyss smoothly spread out, attracting the attention of countless people. But any cultivator with some knowledge could faintly sense that in the scorching atmosphere of the imperial city, there was a cold stiffness hidden within. Not long after, a small rumor spread out from the imperial palace. The day before yesterday, the founding emperor of the imperial palace had been enraged and executed 3,000 palace servants in a single day. Even the current Emperor Chu had personally knelt outside the palace. The true reason could no longer be investigated. but it was clear that some ripples had begun to spread among the peak influences of the empire. Qin Yu brought Lei Xiaoyu away from the imperial city before any of the disturbances had occurred. As a loser, this could be considered an additional benefit. Otherwise, with his previous reputation, once news of the sky eradicating abyss sorcerer spread, he would inevitably attract the attention of all sides. How could he be so carefree today? The carriage was ordinary, and the horses pulling it were also ordinary. Although one was old and the other was lame, they still pulled the carriage steadily. Qin Yu leaned back on a soft couch. In front of him was a chessboard, and Lei Xiaoyu was across from him. She placed down a piece. Qin Yu frowned for a long time, and then threw down the piece in his hand. "I'm tired. I'm going to rest for a while." Lei Xiaoyu pouted. "Big brother Qin, you're doing this again. I'm about to win." Qin Yu comfortably leaned back. "Since I haven't lost, of course you haven't won." He picked up a teacup and took a sip. Immediately, his mouth was filled with the fragrance of tea. He closed his eyes, an intoxicated expression on his face. His gaze passed through the window and looked at the scenery on both sides. He didn't say a word, but he seemed somewhat calm. His soul reflected the trillions of great Daos, as if he were illuminated by stars. Qin Yu had unknowingly been deeply affected. Lei Xiaoyu looked at him and subconsciously bit her lips. Although Qin Yu was normal and his aura was even calmer than before, Lei Xiaoyu could clearly see the changes in him. In the past, Big Brother Qin had worked so hard and didn't waste a single moment to cultivate. But now he had become so sloppy. Could it be that he had been affected by his reputation as a forsaken saint and had lost his confidence? And most importantly, in Lei Xiaoyu's heart, the root cause of Qin Yu's calamity was her. If it weren't for accompanying her, Qin Yu wouldn't have gone to the imperial city and he wouldn't have encountered all of this. "Big Brother Qin, Qin Yu lazily responded. At first, he didn't notice the abnormality in Lei Xiaoyu's mood. After waiting for a moment and seeing no response from her, he opened his eyes and saw that her face was wet with tears. Qin Yu quickly stood up. "Everything was fine. What's wrong?" Lei Xiaoyu cried even more fiercely. "Big Brother Qin, it's all my fault. If you feel uncomfortable in your heart, then let it out. Holding it in like this will only make you feel worse." Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He lifted a hand to wipe away her tears. "I say, just what is going on in that little head of yours? I've already told you that I'm in good condition, so why won't you believe me?" Seeing Lei Xiaoyu's expression of "don't try to comfort me. The more you do this, the more uncomfortable I feel," Qin Yu rubbed his temples. Fine. If you don't believe me, then take a look for yourself." His eyes swept around. The sun and moon force field quietly spread out, isolating the carriage from the outside world. Qin Yu lifted his hand and spread open his palm. Motes of starlight flew out, turning into a resplendent starry sky above his palm. It flickered and faded without end. Qin Yu smiled. This was a mark that he had personally left behind. It came from the embryo egg fragment and contained the trillions of great Daos. Of course, this was only a shallow image. Perhaps what he had truly comprehended might not even be a 10,000th of it. But this didn't affect the endless and mysterious aura that emanated from the starry sky above his palm. This was because, to a certain degree, it could be called a reflection of the vast and mighty great Daos of the world. With Lei Xiaoyu's strength, she was able to sense this. She naturally understood that not only was there no problem with him, but he was even better than before. But soon, Qin Yu discovered that he was wrong. Across from him, Lei Xiaoyu's eyes widened and more tears flowed down her cheeks. She threw herself at Qin Yu and tightly hugged him. Her voice was filled with sorrow and guilt. "Big Brother Qin, it's all my fault. You should have had an incomparably brilliant future, becoming an existence that could step into the world. But because of me, you've fallen to such a state. Big Brother Qin, I am so sad." Qin Yu. He really didn't know how to explain himself. Could he have Banbu and Xiang Shui stop the carriage so that he could display his mountain-shattering chest? But even if he did this, he feared that Lei Xiaoyu would think of even more things. Indeed, the way a woman thought was difficult to grasp in certain matters. Xiaoyu, I'm really fine. Believe me. Lei Xiaoyu stood up. She smiled through her tears. I believe in your big brother Qin. Nothing will happen to you. Nothing will happen to you. Qin Yu thought for a moment and decided not to say anything more to Lei Xiaoyu. In any case, she would understand soon enough. He looked outside the carriage and coldly snorted. Stop wasting time. Hurry up. Xiang Shui was trying to stifle her laughter. Her lips twitched as she heard this. She lifted her whip and tapped the shaft of the carriage. Hurry up, hurry up. Someone's going to get angry. The lame horse snorted twice and quickened its hooves. The old horse that had been trying to get closer to the lame horse snorted in dissatisfaction. It turned its head and glared at Xiang Shui. Xiang Shui curled her lips. What are you glaring at me for? It's not like I have a whip on me. If you want to flatter me, you might as well put in some effort. The old horse thought for a moment and felt that this was indeed the case. It turned its head and galloped away, determined to show off its energy in front of the lame horse. Perhaps it wanted to tell the old horse that although it looked a bit old, and was in fact a bit old, its physical fitness was still excellent. Thus, it wildly galloped forwards. At sunrise, they left the imperial capital, and at sunset the world was covered in a vast expanse of white snow. The crack embedded deep in the earth was already in sight. In a single day, they had crossed 1,000,000 miles. The heaven-extinguishing abyss was right in front of them. Chapter 945. The old horse was truly old, but the lame horse wasn't too obvious. Thus, it seemed to have no interest in the old horse that had just shown off its energy. It opened its mouth and bit at it, warning it not to approach. The lame horse slowly walked to the side and ate the fodder that Bamboo had prepared. Xiang Shui covered her mouth and laughed. The old horse glared at her several times before she managed to suppress her laughter. My suggestion wasn't wrong. The problem is that no one likes you. So what can I do? The old horse lowered its head in sadness. But after a moment, it became restless again and tried to stick its mouth into the lame horse's bowl. Perhaps this was the key to why young men often lost to uncles in love. It was because the hardships of time had bestowed them with sufficiently solid and shockingly thick skin. Qin Yu smiled. He patted the old horse and turned around. When the entrance opens, will you two not go in? The current heaven-eradicating abyss had only descended into the world. The entrance hadn't truly been opened yet. Bamboo said in a low voice, Senior, I hope to follow by your side. At the side, Xiang Shui frowned. Is it dangerous inside? Qin Yu said, I don't know. He turned around and looked at the endless land covered in snow. If he took several more steps forwards, he would enter. But my intuition tells me that if you go in, you might not be able to come out. Xiang Shui nodded. Good. I will wait for you outside. Bamboo's eyes widened. He felt that Xiang Shui's attitude toward Qin Yu was a bit too casual. Could it be that her identity wasn't just a simple maid? If even she chose to stay behind, would he really die if he followed? Qin Yu glanced at him and then at the closed carriage door. If possible, I don't even want to go. You can stay behind. Lei Xiaoyu's condition suddenly became extremely bad. It was unknown what the goo insects within her had sensed, but as they approached heaven-eradicating abyss, they became increasingly excited. Qin Yu could only use some methods to have her enter a deep sleep state to reduce the pain she suffered. He pushed open the door and entered the carriage. Even in her sleep, Lei Xiaoyu's eyebrows were still furrowed, and her face was as pale as paper. Qin Yu bent down and placed a finger between her eyebrows. After carefully sensing for a moment, a dignified look appeared in his eyes. Lei Xiaoyu's current condition was already very bad. Once she entered the sky-eradicating abyss, it would probably be even worse. In other words, this was her last chance. If she couldn't find the original god's corpse and extract the original god's blood, the heavenly eradicating abyss would become her graveyard. He took a deep breath and exhaled. He said in a soft voice, Don't worry. I will do my best to help you survive. This is my promise to you. Lei Xiaoyu seemed to have heard his voice in her sleep. Her furrowed brows relaxed a little. Qin Yu sat down and closed his eyes. With a thought, the projection of 1 trillion stars appeared in his mind. Bathing in the starlight, he seemed to be soaring in the boundless ocean, trying his best to sense and fuse with this ocean with his weak aura. If there came a day in the future when Qin Yu fused with the entire sea of stars, then he would become the incarnation of the great Tao of the world. With a thought, the heavens would collapse, and with a thought, the earth would crack. Outside the snowy plain, where heaven-extinguishing abyss was located, other cultivators gradually arrived. Among them were cultivators who had yet to enter the immortal realm and had weak auras. There are also powerful cultivators with sharp eyes. But without exception, as they looked at the snowy plain, their eyes were filled with awe and heat. When the third cultivator that tried to approach the carriage was forced back by a sword strike and fled, the comfortable carriage that could resist the cold finally calmed down. Although no one had seen the person inside the carriage, if a mere carriage driver had such a terrifying sword cultivation, then it was best not to provoke him. The icy cold was hard to endure, but since they didn't want to waste their strength, they retreated a little. In any case, the entrance to heaven-extinguishing abyss hadn't opened yet. Within the carriage, Qin Yu, who was meditating on the stars of the great Tao, suddenly opened his eyes. He turned around and looked behind him. He could feel a familiar sore intent. It was purer and more formidable than before, and it exuded an aura that could cut apart all. Li Hongye, she had also come. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. This was because he discovered that after this sword intent paused for a moment, it actually changed directions and shot straight towards him. Whoosh! The cry of a sword entered his ears and then faded away. The surroundings quieted down. Countless eyes gathered on him, all of them filled with shock and awe. Who is that woman? What a terrifying sword intent. Her cultivation clearly hasn't reached the divine realm yet, but I can actually feel my heart racing. If I fight with her, I will die within 3 sword strikes. I cannot provoke this woman. Bamboo had to repel powerful enemies 3 times in order to ensure that the carriage wouldn't be harassed. Li Hongye had only landed on the ground, but she had already left everyone in awe. This was the disparity in strength. Thus, Bamboo admitted defeat. He jumped off the carriage and cupped his hands across his chest as he drew back. The door of the carriage opened, and Qin Yu stepped out. He cupped his hands together and said, "Miss Li, we meet again. I must thank you for your help in the Imperial City." It wasn't just because the Imperial City's guards were stationed there to ensure that Qin Yu wouldn't be disturbed. More importantly, it was because Li Hongye and Tang Yi had taken action and caused the cultivators that came to investigate to retreat. Otherwise, Qin Yu wouldn't have been able to easily escape from the Imperial City. Li Hongye had a faint expression. "I know what you are thinking, but heaven-extinguishing abyss isn't something you can meddle in. If you don't leave as soon as possible, you will surely die." After speaking, she didn't give Qin Yu a chance to reply. She turned and walked away. With the cry of a sword, she stepped into the snowy plains. The ice and snow that filled the skies and the terrifying chill that filled the world seemed to be meaningless to her. Imperial City's Li family's sword fanatic. It's her. She is indeed worthy of being called a peerless genius of the new generation alongside Shao Qi. Her sword cultivation has reached a profound level. Cries of alarm rose up one after another. Every person that chased into the snowy plains revealed shock and awe. When these people looked back at Qin Yu, although there wasn't much awe in their eyes, there was still a bit more dread. If he was acquainted with Li Hongye and had her warn him, it was clear that the two of them had intersected before. It was likely that he came from some family clan in the Imperial City. No wonder he had such a fierce guard, even though his cultivation was ordinary. But was heaven-extinguishing abyss a place that could be entered just by relying on guards? It was best if this person obediently retreated, otherwise he would undoubtedly die. Qin Yu didn't care about these gazes. He turned and returned to the carriage. He didn't fear the cold of the snowy plains, but Lei Xiao Yu couldn't. He could only stay here. But Qin Yu didn't want to be discovered by others again in order to avoid unnecessary trouble. With a thought, the sun-moon force field spread out, covering Bamboo and the carriage. Like this, the people around them would still think they were here, but those that passed by wouldn't notice this corner. 3 days later, a fluctuation spread out from deep within the snowy plains. Chinyu opened his eyes from his cultivation, and the image of the starry skies slowly faded away. The entrance to heaven-extinguishing abyss had opened. Across from him, Xiang Shui opened her eyes. "You're leaving?" Chinyu nodded. He carried Lei Xiaoyu on his back and stepped out of the carriage. "Hurry up and leave. Once I come out, I will find you." Bamboo bowed. Chinyu no longer hesitated. He stepped towards the snowy plains. It was only at this time that the surrounding cultivators sensed the aura coming from deep within the snowy plains. "The entrance has opened. Hurry, let's go in. The origin spirit's source is within. The first to enter means that our chances are higher." With excited shouts, cultivators erupted with auras and howled outwards. Even at this time, everyone that passed by Chinyu's side still subconsciously widened their eyes in shock. Rushing into heaven-extinguishing abyss was an extremely dangerous matter to begin with. Even if one was careful, there was still a slim chance of survival. In this situation, he actually wanted to bring along his unconscious daughter, who was clearly heavily injured. This was simply seeking death. They didn't know the relationship between Chinyu and Lei Xiaoyu, and they didn't know what they had experienced. But no matter how they looked at it, this was an extremely stupid decision. But this had nothing to do with them. If one more person died, they would have one less opponent. Whoosh, whoosh, figures rushed past Chinyu, rushing towards the deepest depths of the snowy plains, towards the pitch-black crack embedded in the ground. But his expression remained calm. He only occasionally swept his eyes over the road ahead, his steps calm and steady, neither too fast nor too slow. Chinyu also wanted to be the first person to step into heaven-extinguishing abyss, but sometimes being fast wasn't useful. Heaven-extinguishing abyss was truly worthy of being a dangerous land in the legends that hid countless secrets. It was truly mysterious. Even if one stepped into the divine realm, unless their comprehension of the great Tao of the heavens and earth had reached an extremely profound degree, they still wouldn't be able to sense that this seemingly ordinary snowy plains actually contained endless changes. If one walked in a straight line, they might actually be walking at a different fork in the road with every step they took. It had a good tolerance for mistakes. Even if one walked into the wrong fork, they could still continue forwards, but their speed would be much slower. The more mistakes one made, the slower one would be. Once one reached a certain limit, even if one ran wildly through the snowy plains for 100 years, they would never reach heaven-extinguishing abyss. Standing high in the air, one could see that although Chinyu's speed wasn't fast, the distance between him and heaven-extinguishing abyss was constantly shrinking. As for the people beside him, although they were as fast as horses, they seemed to be walking in place, slowly being left behind. And what was strange was that these cultivators had excited expressions, as if they hadn't noticed anything strange at all. Chinyu stopped. It wasn't that he couldn't see the road ahead, but that behind him, the goo insects in Lei Xiaoyu's body were beginning to stir restlessly. Before this, Chinyu only had a guess. But now he could confirm that these goo insects were related to heaven-extinguishing abyss. Or if you were to boldly guess, they came from here. If this was true, the goo insects that came from heaven-extinguishing abyss had entered Lei Xiaoyu's body, causing her to live in pain until today. Now, she had no choice but to enter heaven-extinguishing abyss to seek a final hope of survival. It was like a samsara, as if there was an invisible hand pushing her forward. Chinyu held onto Lei Xiaoyu, having her lean closer to him. He let out a breath of white air. If something like fate really exists in this world, I believe it won't be so cruel to you. You will surely be reborn here. Please hold on. Do not give up. Ha! Chinyu's feet landed. The ice and snow on the ground shattered, leaving behind his footprints. In the next moment, he vanished from sight. Chapter 946. The world in front of him instantly stretched to the limit, turning into countless points of light that were connected together. They were like dazzling auroras that reflected in his eyes. In the next moment, all of these dazzling lights violently shrank inward, turning from an infinitely expanding state of nothingness back into reality. Thus, Qin Yu discovered that he and Lei Xiaoyu had entered heaven extinguishing abyss. Kacha, a light sound entered his ears. Qin Yu knew that this was because he had crushed some sort of crystal on the ground when he arrived. Without warning, fear surged out from the depths of his heart. It was like boundless waves that completely covered his soul. Without hesitation, Qin Yu shouted out loud and shot into the skies. He didn't know where he should go, but there was one thing he was incomparably sure of. If he stayed where he was, he would be in great trouble. A breath of time after Qin Yu left, the place where he crushed the crystal shattered without warning. That place was like a giant invisible hand that clenched into a fist and ruthlessly smashed into it, directly disintegrating. This disintegration opened up the source of destruction. It didn't gradually converge or dissipate, but instead continued to spread outwards at an increasingly fast speed. It was like the world was being destroyed. No, this was the true destruction of the world. A dark golden light surged in Qin Yu's eyes. He swept his eyes around and took a deep breath. His flesh and bones crackled, and his speed increased. Whoosh! Finally, he passed through the invisible barrier by a hair's breadth. The terrifying feeling of annihilation that enveloped his soul rapidly faded away. He turned around. In the distance, a point of light suddenly erupted with light, like a shining star in the night sky. Then, in the next moment, it was extinguished. Qin Yu's complexion was dignified. He knew that if he hadn't been a step ahead and escaped from that destroyed world, he would have been pulled into the abyss of destruction along with that point of light. Heaven-extinguishing abyss was actually terrifying to the extreme. He took a deep breath and restrained his thoughts. Qin Yu looked around. Wherever he was, the world was maintaining its basic stability. In front of him were mountains, rivers, trees, and even some not-so-powerful life, auras. Shua. His figure flickered, and he vanished from sight. 5 days later, Qin Yu stood atop a mountain peak. He looked up at the great sun in the skies, a thoughtful look on his face. During this period of time, he had gained an approximate understanding of the existence of heaven-extinguishing abyss. It was like a broken mirror. Each fragment was an independent small world, some very big, some very small. The larger the world fragment, the more stable the space, and the more formidable life forms it could accommodate. On the other hand, the smaller the world fragment, like the one Qin Yu first stepped into, was extremely unstable. If it were to be affected by any external force, there was a chance it would collapse and be destroyed. More importantly, perhaps because these countless large and small world fragments originated from a single entity, even the smallest world fragment would produce a law that could destroy everything once it collapsed. In other words, after the world collapsed, everything within its range, regardless of what it was, would be destroyed along with the world itself. Of course, in Qin Yu's opinion, there should be a relative limit. When one's strength exceeded a certain point, even if the world collapsed, it would not cause any harm to one's body. Qin Yu didn't know what sort of cultivation he needed to have in order to ignore the collapse of the world, but he knew he absolutely couldn't do it. Therefore, if he wanted to survive, he had to choose a large and stable fragment world. Qin Yu did have the ability to do this. Although he couldn't clearly see all the floating fragmented worlds in the heaven-eradicating abyss, it wasn't hard for him to find a relatively safe place to stay. But the other cultivators, as Qin Yu thought of the crowds of people outside the heaven-eradicating abyss, a trace of pity flashed in his eyes. If one only cared about their own benefits and ignored the dangers, they would only harm themselves in the end. Qin Yu placed Lei Xiaoyu down and carefully examined her. He subconsciously frowned at her current condition. As he thought, ever since he entered this place, the goo insects had become increasingly difficult to suppress, and their demands on Lei Xiaoyu had become increasingly terrifying. There was less time than he expected. He had to speed things up, but doing so would inevitably increase the number of unknown risks. Qin Yu might be able to resist them, but Lei Xiaoyu, sitting beside her, Qingyu looked down at her for a long time. Then, he let out a long breath. He had to find a safe place to settle Lei Xiaoyu down. He couldn't continue to keep her by his side, but in the heaven-eradicating abyss, where it was safe. As for whether or not he could find it, Qingyu didn't have any confidence. Whatever, he wouldn't think too much about it. Carrying Lei Xiaoyu on his back, Qingyu jumped down. After several leaps, he vanished from sight. 3 days later, when he stepped into the 11th fragment world, Qingyu's eyes brightened. He could feel the incomparably stable aura of a world. Not too far away, there was a very large fragment world. With a flick of his sleeves, space twisted, imprisoning several ivy vines. Then, Qingyu rapidly moved in the direction he sensed. As he left, the space distortion vanished, and the ivy vines regained their freedom. They continued to chase after Qingyu, but after several breaths of time, they had no choice but to stop. The reason he didn't destroy them was because he knew that there was no end to these things. The more he killed, the more they would appear. It was better to save some energy. For hours later, Qingyu stopped. He had arrived at the edge of the world. Looking up, he could see dots of light flickering in the darkness like stars. Every dot of light represented a fragment world. If Qingyu hadn't personally experienced this, he feared he would have found it hard to believe. The reason was simple. Every dot of light was a fragment world. Although they varied in size, even the smallest of them, when they were pieced together, they formed an inconceivably large territory. Just what sort of terrifying strength was needed for such a large world to be destroyed to its current state? And now, Qingyu wanted to find the aura of the stable fragment world he sensed before from these dots of light. To other cultivators, this would be no different from fishing for sand in the sea. But to Qingyu, he only needed to spend a bit more time. But soon, Qingyu discovered that things weren't as simple as he thought. He could sense the aura of this fragment world, but he couldn't accurately determine its location. The dark golden light in his eyes became increasingly thick. After a moment, Qingyu closed his eyes, allowing a sour feeling to flow through them. Then he smiled. Even if he tried with all his strength, it would be nearly impossible to find this fragment world. Moreover, the chances of other cultivators finding this fragment world were infinitesimally small. Moreover, it was large and stable enough. In other words, as long as he entered and hid Lei Xiaoyu, her safety wouldn't be a problem. With a single step, Qingyu left the fragment world and entered a space channel. His field of vision twisted, and he appeared in another fragment world. Qingyu swept his eyes around and knew this wasn't the place. He turned without hesitation and entered another space channel. The reason he did this was because even in the end, Qingyu wasn't able to lock onto the aura of this fragment world. He could only narrow it down to a certain range. After his 43rd attempt, the moment he entered the space channel, Qingyu knew he had made the right choice. Different from before, the speed of the space channel transmission was much slower. It took several breaths of time before his field of vision brightened. A cry echoed out from above his head. Qingyu looked up, and his pupils shrank. At this time, the phantom of a flying dragon was reflected in his eyes. Its body was like a lizard, and there was a pair of feathered wings on its back. When its wings spread out, they blocked out the skies and cast a massive shadow over the ground. What a formidable aura! Even with Qinyu's current cultivation, he still instinctively felt a bit of dread in his heart. After a moment, Qingyu determined that this fragment world was indeed the best place to hide Lei Xiaoyu. But the premise was that he had to find a sufficiently safe place. A day later, a heaven-shaking roar echoed through the air. In the distance, several mountains began to shatter and collapse. Qingyu spat out a mouthful of blood. His speed increased, leaving behind a series of afterimages as he rushed into the jungle and vanished from sight. An incomparably massive head drilled out from the ground. It looked in the direction that Qingyu left in with icy cold eyes. After a moment of hesitation, it gave up on chasing after him. Only its head was revealed, but it blocked out the great sun in the skies. Its aura was so terrifying that it caused space to distort at all times. Hiding atop an ancient tree, Chinyu spread out the sun-moon force field, isolating himself from the outside world. After determining that the terrifying dragon beast hadn't chased after him, he let out a long breath and bitterly smiled. He didn't have any ill intentions. He just wanted to hide Lei Xiaoyu in the dragon beast cave, but he never imagined that its senses would be so sharp. If it weren't for the fact that he had run fast, Chinyu feared he would have suffered a fate where his bones would have broken and his life would have been forfeit. When he first faced the mount of the dragon overlord, the bat-winged dragon king, Chinyu had already been shocked by its strength. But compared to this dragon beast today, perhaps in front of it, the bat-winged dragon was nothing more than a dessert. The disparity in strength between the two sides was hard to describe with words. Chinyu even suspected that the strength of this dragon beast had surpassed the limits of the divine realm to a certain degree. But for some unknown reason, its intelligence didn't seem high, as if it had been restricted in some way. Letting out a deep breath, Chinyu sat down cross-legged and began to recover from the injuries caused by the roar. No matter what, Lei Xiaoyu was safe now. Even if someone found this fragment world, they could forget breaking into the dragon beast cave. As for killing it, what a joke. Chinyu could confirm that even if all the cultivators that entered heaven-eradicating abyss were pulled to this place, they would only stand in a row and offer up their heads. Borrowing the powerful restorative attributes of the ancient immortal body, Chinyu opened his eyes half a day later. A sharp light flashed, and his injuries were completely healed. Without further delay, Chinyu hid his aura and soared into the skies. He wanted to find the original god's corpse as soon as possible. This time couldn't surpass a month. This was the limit of what he estimated Lei Xiaoyu could last. As for how to obtain it, to be honest, Chinyu had no clue. He could only take things one step at a time and act accordingly. Shua, Chinyu stepped into the space channel and vanished from sight. Chapter 9:47. The wiping out the heavens abyss was extremely famous in the world. It was not only because it was dangerous and strange, but also because it contained endless treasures. In the tens of millions of books and biographies, it was recorded that so-and-so came out of the wiping out the heavens abyss on a certain date and obtained a certain treasure. These were all facts that could be verified. That was why every time the wiping out the heavens abyss opened, even though they knew it was a cannibal cave, countless cultivators still entered. Ha! It's the Lotus of Rebirth. It's actually the Lotus of Rebirth. A strong cultivator held the lotus in his hand, his face filled with excitement. The air was filled with the smell of blood. There were two cultivators lying on the ground, and further away, there was the corpse of a black-armored monster. It was obvious that in order to obtain the Lotus of Rebirth, both sides had engaged in a life and death battle. Although the surviving cultivators were sad at the death of their companions, they couldn't suppress the joy in their eyes as they looked at the Lotus of Rebirth. When a cultivator cultivated, they had to experience all sorts of tribulations in order to become stronger step by step and finally become a powerhouse that was respected by others. However, during this process, there were too many uncontrollable dangers. If one wasn't careful, they would die and their cultivation would be for naught. The Lotus of Rebirth was one of these rare treasures. In a sense, it was a treasure that could give people a second chance. It could guarantee that after a cultivator died, their soul and true spirit wouldn't scatter and would directly enter the cycle of reincarnation. The moment they were born, their memories would be awakened. There was no doubt that a person who had the memories of a previous life was terrifying. As long as their luck wasn't too bad, they would be able to accomplish great things. And now, there was a Lotus of Rebirth in front of them. The good thing was that the treasure was in their hands. The bad thing was there was only one. The strong cultivator's eyes flashed, and he said in a low voice, "Everyone, according to our agreement, the treasure belongs to whoever obtains it in the end. Of course, I was able to obtain the Lotus of Rebirth because of everyone's help. I am willing to take out additional treasures as repayment. Wait a minute, another cultivator sneered. You and I did have this agreement before, but everyone knows how precious the lotus of rebirth is. Fellow cultivator Zhou and fellow cultivator Huang even lost their lives because of it. Fellow cultivator Gu, isn't a bit too much to just take it? That's right. This Qian also believes that the agreement we made earlier was inappropriate. We should make another agreement regarding the ownership of this reincarnation lotus. Fellow Taoist Gu, the rebirth lotus is truly too precious. If you insist on keeping it, then I'm afraid it'll cause discord between us. Please reconsider. Of course, this was just a more elegant way of putting it. To put it bluntly, it meant that you'd better be tactful and take out the reincarnation lotus so that we can discuss how to distribute it. Otherwise, we'll join hands to deal with you. Cultivator Gu's complexion paled. He swept his eyes over everyone, perhaps because he thought about it. He really didn't have the strength to fight 1 against 5. He clenched his teeth and nodded. Since fellow Taoists feel this isn't appropriate, then let's discuss it again. I have no objections. He raised his hand and pushed forward. The reincarnation lotus flew out from his fingers and floated in front of the crowd. Schwa! All eyes instantly gathered on him, emitting a fiery aura. Right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. Cultivator Gu's eyes widened, and the surface of his blood vessels turned red. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying backwards. Qian Zhongshan, how dare you hurt me? He reached out his hand, wanting to grab the reincarnation lotus. Everyone was secretly surprised that Qian Zhongshan had such courage and dared to directly attack someone. But they didn't care that Gu Tai Tai was injured. But now, Gu Tai Tai wanted to take away the reincarnation lotus. Bang! The void shook once more. At least 3 strengths rumbled out at the same time. Gu Tai Tai spat out another mouthful of blood and fell far away. Ah! Suddenly, a cultivator cried out miserably. He leapt up, but his feet were already entangled by a pitch-black aura. You dare to sneak attack me? You are courting death. With a roar, he punched out at the person beside him. The cultivator's eyes widened. It wasn't me. His following words were interrupted. The situation immediately spiraled out of control. More and more people attacked. The reincarnation lotus was right in front of them, and this treasure was enough to tempt the hearts of others. Since that was the case, there was no need to say anything, and everyone would rely on their own strength. A fierce battle ensued. The degree of brutality far surpassed that of the monster beasts protecting the reincarnation lotus. From time to time, someone would cry out in pain. Their body would be torn apart, and their soul would be imprisoned before being burnt into nothingness. Since they wanted to kill someone, they had to do it cleanly and flawlessly. Otherwise, there would be endless troubles in the future. None of them were newcomers to the world of martial arts. Since they had already shed all pretense of cordiality and were risking their lives, they naturally wouldn't show any mercy. An hour later, the smell of blood in the air became even thicker. There were only 3 people left standing, all of them wounded and pale. One of them was Qian Zhongshan. He gloomily swept his eyes over the 2 people. Let's continue to fight. No one has the confidence to survive, so I suggest we stop here. He pointed at the corpses. The wealth on these people and the reincarnation lotus in front of us should be enough for us to divide amongst ourselves. The other 2 people hesitated for a moment before nodding in agreement. One of them said, "You and I will make a solemn vow that we will not tell anyone about today's events." Of course, after making the vow, the 3 people glanced at each other. They each chose a position and began to clean up the battlefield. Heaven eradicating abyss attracted countless cultivators. Their cultivations varied, but those that had the qualifications to enter, unless their luck was heaven-defying, had some methods and naturally had considerable wealth. Just as he was beaming with joy, a pitiful scream suddenly rang out. A cultivator that was searching for treasures was blasted into the air. Before he fell to the ground, his body was torn apart and his soul aura collapsed along with it. Qian Zhongshan and the other person's complexions changed. They looked at Gu Tai Tai, who was sitting up, their faces filled with shock. The two people's first thought was that in that chaotic battle just now, no one had done anything. Should they kill off this severely wounded fellow first? But soon, they could feel the tyrannical aura that filled Gu Tai Tai's body. Qian Zhongshan and the other person's complexions became increasingly ugly. Fellow Taoist Gu Tai's methods, I admire you, Qian Zhongshan gloomily said. Gu Tai Tai smiled. I was forced to do so. If it weren't for fellow Taoists threatening me, I wouldn't have ended up like this. Qian Zhongshan coldly sneered. My skills are inferior, I am convinced. The reincarnation lotus belongs to fellow Taoist Gu Tai. I bid my farewells. He turned and left. But then, his complexion suddenly changed. With a loud roar, the space around him shook, scattering the incoming strength. Qian Zhongshan turned his head and roared, Fellow Taoist Gu Tai, are you planning on leaving me here as well? Gu Tai Tai lightly said, The trouble I stirred up today is far too great. If this were to spread out, my future days would be difficult. Although I obtained the reincarnation lotus, I don't want to use it. A cold light flashed in his eyes. So, I asked fellow Taoist Qian to help me. In this world, I believe that only the dead are trustworthy. Join forces and kill him. Qian Zhongshan roared. But unfortunately, he and the other person were both injured. As for Gu Tai Tai, he was still hiding a portion of his strength. Thus, after a moment, Qian Zhongshan and the other cultivator fell to the ground. Besides panting a little and his face pale, Gu Tai Tai didn't seem to have suffered much. He revealed a smug smile. Although cultivation was the most important thing in this world, the brain was also a good thing. With just a little trick, he had become the one who had the last laugh today. The reincarnation lotus was his. Gu Tai Tai's complexion changed. He looked up into the skies. Space twisted and a figure appeared. A hidden space channel. Damn, someone had actually arrived just in time. A fierce light surged deep in Gu Tai Tai's eyes. But after his thoughts raced several times, he didn't hurry to attack. If this person was weaker than him, then there was nothing to say. Otherwise, he would have to reconsider. Only an idiot would attack upon meeting someone. Shua. His field of vision brightened, and he smelled blood in the air. He frowned, and his eyes fell on Gu Tai Tai. Then, in the next moment, his gaze was drawn to the reincarnation lotus floating in front of him. Before preparing for the things beyond mountain scene, Qin had crammed in his knowledge and immediately recognized this treasure. If things didn't go smoothly and Lei Xiaoyu couldn't escape death, then the reincarnation lotus could protect her life from another angle. Reincarnation lotus, the name isn't wrong, but if you want to use it to save someone, you should give up. The little blue lamp's thoughts fluctuated. Qin asked why. The little blue lamp lightly said, The goo insects within Lei Xiaoyu's body are not ordinary. You should understand what I mean when I say they are not ordinary. Even if the reincarnation lotus is effective, it is impossible to protect her true spirit from scattering. Moreover, the quality of this thing isn't high and the chances of triggering it are low. Qin immediately lost interest. He trusted the little blue lamp's judgment. He glanced at Gu Tai Tai once more and then turned to leave. As for the scene of slaughter in front of him, he had already seen it many times. It couldn't move his mind in the least. Treasures were rare in this world, and everyone wanted to obtain them. Since there were battles, it was inevitable that there would be casualties. If one's skill was inferior, it was natural that they would lose their life. When Qin Yu arrived, his first glance, especially his pause on the reincarnation lotus, indicated that he had recognized this treasure. Gu Tai Tai's heart sank. He had already prepared himself to fight, but he never imagined that Qin Yu would turn and leave in the next moment. What was going on? This was the reincarnation lotus, who wouldn't be moved upon seeing it. You actually said you were going to leave? And if you want to leave, then leave. Why did you look at me before leaving? Do you want to remember my appearance, so that after I leave heaven severing abyss, you can report me to others for killing people and stealing their treasures? Fuck, you can't leave. Gu Tai Shan diabolically grinned. Brat, since you've come, You might as well stay here and accompany these people. At this moment, he was filled with confidence. This was because Qin Yu had recognized the reincarnation lotus and then turned to leave. This already explained everything. This person's strength was ordinary. But Gu Tai Tai had to admit that his strength wasn't ordinary. If he wanted to kill Qin Yu, wouldn't that be easy? So, sometimes smart people wouldn't be able to live for long. If they thought too much, they would often fall into a trap. He turned, lifted a hand, and pressed down. After the earth rumbled, the world quieted down. Qin Yu looked at the reincarnation lotus floating in the air and opened his fingers. He casually glanced at it and then put it away. These people that had fallen to the ground had given up their lives for the reincarnation lotus. But in Qin Yu's eyes, it was nothing more than a dispensable object. It had to be said that this was the greatest irony of the world. What you risked your life to do might not even be worth mentioning in the eyes of others. Qin Yu turned to leave, but fluctuations came from the spatial channel above his head. Shwa, shwa. Several figures walked out. As they saw Qin Yu standing in a pool of blood and corpses, their complexions changed. Big brother. With a sharp cry, a female cultivator stared at the pit in the ground and at the bloody Gu Tai Tai. If it weren't for the fact that her emotions weren't fake, Qin Yu really would have wondered how this girl could recognize him. I want you to be buried with Big Brother. The female cultivator lifted a hand, and a radiant light erupted. Wait! Zhuohan stopped her. He looked to the side. Miss Li, do you know this fellow Taoist? Li Hongye stepped forwards, her expression faint. I said that heaven-eradicating abyss isn't a place you should have come to. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He never thought he would meet her here. Thank you for Miss Li's reminder, but since I appeared here, I naturally have my reasons. Zhuohan leaned to the side and listened to the cultivator beside him speak. After several breaths of time, his eyes flashed, and he said, So, is fellow Taoist Qin Yu. I have heard of fellow Taoist name before, but I wonder where Miss Lei Xiaoyu is right now. Qin Yu glanced at him. You don't need to worry about this matter. Indeed, the love of beauty was the root of all troubles. He didn't want to waste words with a man who had clearly been blinded by beauty and was filled with hostility. He cupped his hands together. Miss Li, if there is nothing else, then I will bid my farewells. Li Hongye frowned. Hold on, I also want to know where Lei Xiaoyu is. Qin Yu had a calm expression. She is where she should be. Zhuohan shook his head. The rumors say that Lei Xiaoyu trusts fellow Taoist Qin Yu, but now it seems that her judgment isn't good. Li Hongye waited for several breaths of time. Seeing that he had no intention of explaining, her eyes turned cold. Qin Yu, I am very disappointed in you. The female cultivator that was stopped took this chance to scream. Miss Li, he killed my big brother and the others for a rebirth lotus. Whoosh, everyone's complexions changed. They naturally knew how precious the rebirth lotus was. It was no wonder that this surnamed Qin didn't hesitate to slaughter them. Li Hongye slowly said, Give face to teacher and leave behind the rebirth lotus. Today, I will allow you to leave, but in the future, do not appear in front of me again. Qin Yu's palm flashed. He took out the rebirth lotus and turned to leave. His straightforward actions surpassed everyone's expectations. After a brief moment of shock, Qin Yu had already vanished from their line of sight. Zhuohan shook his head. This Qin Yu is quite decisive. Another person said, I think he is afraid of Miss Li. He knows he isn't her match, so he simply lowers his head. This sort of person was actually able to win the trust of the Lei family's father and daughter. I'm beginning to wonder whether or not Lei Qianjun is, as the rumors say. Lei Xiaoyu died an unjust death. Li Hongye glanced at the rebirth lotus. Let's go. Qin Yu didn't even need to think to know what Li Hongye and the people around her were thinking, as well as how they would look down on him. But so what? Was he supposed to tell them that he had placed Lei Xiaoyu somewhere safe? Forget it. No one was related to anyone else, so they could think whatever they wanted. Could they make him feel bad for even a second? Or was it that he couldn't eat? Moreover, he could borrow these people's mouths to convince them that Lei Xiaoyu had died. This was a good thing for Qin Yu. It would save him a great deal of trouble. Qin Yu didn't have time to waste on these people. He only had a single goal, and that was to find the original god's corpse and extract its blood essence. As for the rebirth lotus, that was something that he could do without. He could only consider it a complete repayment of Li Hongye's favor in the imperial city. Chapter 948. On the 15th day of entering heaven eradicating abyss, Qin Yu had calculated that Lei Xiaoyu would reach her limit. He stood at the edge of fragment world, looking at the endless nothingness in front of him. As he looked at the innumerable motes of light that dotted this nothingness, a dignified expression appeared on his face. Qin Yu began to suspect whether or not he had fallen into a strange land similar to the legends where every grain of sand was a world. In fact, the fragment world he had passed through before was only a tiny, almost insignificant part of the entire heaven-eradicating abyss. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the tumbling thoughts in his heart. The confusion in his eyes was swept away and replaced with determination once more. He believed that out of all the cultivators that had entered heaven-eradicating abyss, he was at the forefront. Since someone had found the corpse of an original god, then as long as he was careful enough, he would be able to do the same. As for the endless fragment world in front of him, there had to be a way to cross over. These fragment worlds all truly exist, and they themselves form the natural barrier of heaven-eradicating abyss. If one cannot break through, they will forever remain on the periphery, unable to touch upon the source of heaven-eradicating abyss. Zhuohan smiled, his eyes filled with confidence. Perhaps it is normal for everyone to doubt my words, but whether or not they are true or false will be known with a single test. He swept his eyes over everyone. In order to make everyone feel at ease, I will also participate. I wonder which fellow Taoist is willing to join me? A person smiled. Brother Zhua and I have been friends for many years, so I naturally trust you. Count me in. I'm also willing to join. Since Brother Zhua is willing to share this information with us, how could we doubt you? I, Zhuohan, am willing to give it a try. Zhuohan clapped his hands. Good. With the four of us joining forces, although we cannot open the barrier, it is more than enough to test its authenticity. The three of you, please come to my side. I will tell you the method. A moment later, after confirming that the three of them had grasped the method, Zhuohan said, the method to open the barrier has extremely high requirements for cooperation. There cannot be any accidents. The three of you must prepare yourselves. Fellow Taoist Zhua, rest assured. Zhua, the four people stood apart, each taking a corner. They simultaneously lifted their hands and pressed forward. At the same time, the auras within their bodies began to shake, maintaining the same frequency and resonating with each other. This resonance was weak at first, but as time passed, it seemed to fuse into the surrounding world, causing space to ripple. Ripples that looked like tiny waves appeared in front of everyone's eyes and spread in all directions. This is... A cultivator's eyes widened in surprise. From these fluctuations, he could sense a distant aura. Although it was incomparably weak, it was still able to shake his mind. It was as if there were countless precious treasures hidden there, causing one to instinctively feel a burning desire and greed. Li Hongye's eyes lit up. She took a step forward and pressed her hand on the ripples in space. This scene caused many people's hearts to tremble. They swallowed the words that were about to come out of their mouths. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but that he didn't dare. The sword maniac of the Imperial Cities Li clan was like the sun at high noon. Who dared to offend him? Fortunately, Li Hongye's actions didn't seem to affect Zhuohan and the other three's probing. She closed her eyes slightly and sensed. After several breaths of time, the four of them let out sighs of relief and drew back their hands. They glanced at each other and saw the joy in each other's eyes. They were operating it personally, so their senses were clearer than anyone else's. They could already confirm that the fragment world barrier was true. Zhuohan cupped his hands together. Miss, what do you think? 10,000 years ago, the Zhua family separated from the Li family. From a mere family servant, They leapt up to become one of the most illustrious families of the empire. This naturally included the support of the Li family. Thus, even though they had today's status, the Zhou family still followed the Li family's lead. When the juniors faced the Li family's direct descendants, they were even more respectful. Li Hongye said, "What you say is correct. Prepare to open the channel." Zhuohan respectfully nodded. He swept his eyes over everyone. "Everyone, if there are no objections, then let us begin." 4 hours later, 36 cultivators joined forces, each with 9 people occupying a corner of a square. They simultaneously lifted their hands and pressed forwards. 36 aura fluctuations maintained the same frequency, causing the world to resonate with them. They lifted their hands and pressed forwards. Rumble, rumble. With a roar, a channel slowly appeared in the 4 directions. A completely different aura was released from within. Zhuohan shouted out loud, "Now is the time. Everyone, follow me in." Whoosh, minus 36 people flew into the channel. The resonance of the world vanished, and the channel loudly collapsed. Heaven eradicating abyss was formed from trillions of fragmented worlds. When they combined together, they formed a world-shaking barrier. Only by breaking open the barrier could one enter the true heaven eradicating abyss. And the legendary Essence Spirit Corpse was located there. The good news was that the method to break open the barrier of the fragmented worlds had already spread amongst the cultivators. After Qin Yu inadvertently obtained it, he used his observations and made a slight deduction to determine that this matter was true. But what he didn't understand was why this clearly confidential information would spread like wildfire, as if there were people who didn't know about it. It was as if there was an invisible hand behind the scenes that was pushing this matter forward. Qin Yu didn't know what the reason was, but he inwardly became a bit more cautious. Then, he spent another 2 days before he finally found a team and smoothly became a member. To open a channel with 4 people and 9 is too high a requirement for a cultivator's cultivation. We cannot accomplish this, so we can only make up for it with numbers. But the more people there are, the more likely there are accidents. I hope that everyone can do their best so that nothing goes wrong. The temporary leader of the team was a woman. Her appearance was ordinary, and there were crow's feet at the corners of her eyes. Amongst female cultivators, she was an extremely slovenly woman. After all, it wasn't too difficult for a cultivator to make themselves more pleasing to the eye, much less when one's cultivation was at the divine realm. Her eyes swept over everyone, pausing on Qin Yu for a moment. She continued to say, "If everyone is ready, then let's begin." A number of 4 people and 9 was the most perfect method to break open the barrier. Today, they were going to use the number of 6 people, which meant that 54 people had to occupy a hexagon. The success rate of opening a channel with a hexagon wasn't too high. As expected, the first attempt failed. The second attempt was a repeat of the first. After resting for another half a day, the third attempt was made. Within the hexagon that was barely formed, a channel appeared with difficulty. The method to open the barrier had already been spread out. It was unknown how many people had entered the true heaven eradicating abyss ahead of time. Now that the channel was right in front of them, who was willing to wait any longer? Moreover, this channel was on the verge of collapse. Perhaps only the first few people to enter would be able to smoothly pass through. As for the people behind, sorry, they could only think of another way. Later, let's join forces and rush in together. A cold woman's voice sounded out in Qin Yu's ears. He didn't look up, only slightly nodding in agreement. Stepping forwards, Qin Yu rushed toward the entrance. But just as he moved, there was a sneer beside him. "You want to go in with just yourself? Stay here for me." Qin Yu flicked his sleeves. With a loud cracking sound, the hand grasping towards him twisted at a strange angle. The cultivator's eyes widened. He never imagined that he would be injured, and then he cried out in pain. Whoosh! Qin Yu's speed was astonishing. In a flash, he had arrived outside the entrance. There was the sound of breaking air. The team leader appeared behind him. Qin Yu glanced at her, and the two of them rushed out without hesitation. "Damn it, stop them!" Bang, bang, dozens of powerful auras rumbled outwards. Join forces to block them, otherwise no one will be able to enter. The leader's voice was still cold, but it was a bit more dignified. Chinyu didn't speak. He lifted a hand and punched backwards. In that instant, 5-colored divine light erupted. White, black, blue, red, and yellow revolved endlessly, turning into a grinding disk. 5 elements samsara. The leader's eyes burst out with light. She followed closely behind Chinyu and lifted a hand. Kacha! Kacha! A layer of hard ice appeared on the surface of the 5-element grinding disk. It was slightly black, but it didn't affect the circulation of the power of the 5 elements at all. On the contrary, it seemed to complement the power of the 5 elements, causing the defensive capabilities of the 5-element samsara to rise by a great deal. Bang, bang, auras rumbled outwards, many of them powerhouses. Even though the 5-element samsara superimposed the power of ice, it still began to crack. Without surprise, it would soon collapse. But it had already completed its mission. Chinyu and the leader turned without hesitation and rushed into the channel. In the next moment, the 5-element samsara collapsed. Without waiting for the follow-up strength to rush in, the shaking channel collapsed. How hateful! Don't let me see you again. He could faintly hear the angry roars of the crowd, but Chinyu didn't care about them. Perhaps because the entrance had collapsed, it had affected the stability of the channel. A terrifying, tearing strength came from all around him. Even with his powerful mortal body, he found it hard to withstand. Hearing a stuffy cough, Chinyu looked up. The leader standing in front of him had large cracks all over her body. Then, the surface of her body began to fall off piece by piece, soon revealing a brand new appearance. It wasn't strange or horrifying at all. Rather, it was beautiful beyond imagination. In this dark and distorted space channel, she actually gave Chinyu a dazzling feeling. From this, it could be seen just how beautiful this woman who had shed her ruined body to reveal her true appearance was. But that was all. After looking at her several times, Chinyu lowered his head and closed his eyes, resisting the tearing force of space with all his strength. He wasn't a young and inexperienced boy who would be blinded by beauty. Who knew what he would encounter next? Rather than looking at a beautiful woman, it was better to think about how to survive. A fragrant wind blew past him. Chinyu opened his eyes in surprise. He saw the woman in front of him take several steps back and dive into his arms. I'm borrowing you. Once we leave, you will naturally return the favor. Her voice was still cold and indifferent, with almost no fluctuations in her emotions. This feeling of being treated like an object by someone wasn't too pleasant. Chinyu looked down and saw the woman's slightly red ears. He hesitated for a moment and then closed his eyes, choosing to ignore her. It really wasn't that he coveted her beauty. Fine, Chinyu had to admit that being hugged by such a beautiful woman was indeed a good feeling. But the true reason was that Chinyu felt a trace of familiarity from the woman in his arms. That's right, it was familiarity. Faintly, he had a feeling that he owed her something very important and that he had to protect her safety. It was as if it was his responsibility to keep her safe and sound. As he smelled the woman's scent, Chinyu's mind didn't waver. Instead, that familiar feeling became increasingly strong. What was going on? Chapter 949. Soon, Chinyu couldn't be bothered with the woman in his arms anymore. This was because the environment of the space channel was becoming increasingly harsh as time passed. Besides the tearing strength, there was also a trace of chill. It wasn't too thick, but it was like an incomparably small needle that ruthlessly pierced into his flesh. Chinyu's blood energy stagnated, nearly freezing over. Between his eyebrows, a layer of white frost began to cover him. A cold chill filled the air, as if he had fallen into an eternal abyss of ice. His entire body would be frozen, and his bodily defensive capabilities would be greatly reduced. Chinyu took a deep breath and shouted out loud. The 2 hearts in his chest began to vigorously beat. The stagnant blood energy in his body seemed to be ruthlessly kicked. With loud, rumbling sounds, it began to boil like hot water. His skin turned red like a heated stone. All of the een chill that had invaded his body was instantly refined into nothingness. The woman hiding in his arms suddenly widened her eyes, a look of shock on her face. Then, she pressed her body even closer to Chinyu, borrowing the warm currents around him to dispel the een chill that had invaded her body. Suddenly, the woman's eyes widened. "Be careful." Then, she discovered that the moment she opened her mouth, Chinyu had already attacked. Without hesitation, he punched the twisting space channel. At this time, a face appeared in the space channel. It was similar to a human face, but it had 3 eyes. It was extremely strange. As Chinyu's fist fell, surprise appeared in the left eye and ridicule appeared in the right eye. Then, the middle eye began to shine with a silver light. His fist paused for a moment before speeding up. It smashed into the 3-eyed face, causing it to violently distort and then collapse. Before it collapsed, the face's 3 eyes were wide open, as if it couldn't believe that it had been destroyed so easily. Schwa, the tearing strength of space and the een chill that constantly invaded his body suddenly vanished from sight. Chinyu's figure fell to the ground. He came out. A repulsive force flashed in his arms, and the woman flew out. She looked around, joy in her eyes before she immediately calmed down. She turned around. "Chinyu, you helped me. I will keep my promise and repay you." She lifted a hand, and a scale appeared on her palm. "If you hold this in your hand, you can feel the pull of chi. It will bring you to a large lake, and there's a demonic beast hidden at the bottom of the lake. After you kill it, you will have a great harvest." There was another flash of light in his palm, and a command talisman appeared. This is a life talisman created by a powerful cultivator before his death. It can open his cave abode. This cave abode is in the extinguishing heaven abyss. The woman paused for a moment. Of course, this is a single-choice question. You can only choose one. Seeing Chinyu's calm and unmoved expression, she frowned. "Are you not satisfied?" Chinyu lightly said, "By taking out the scale armor and life symbol. Isn't that the same as revealing your strength to me? So what is your goal? Just say it." The woman glanced at him. "I like talking to smart people. Shurien, put away the scale armor and the life talisman. These 2 things can bring you a big harvest. If you want to go with me, I can take you to find the original god's corpse." A sharp light flashed in Chinyu's eyes. "How can I believe you? These 2 items alone aren't enough." The woman said, "Of course they aren't enough, but what if you add this as well?" She took out a jade box. To be more precise, it was a piece of jade that had been cut into the shape of a box. It was transparent and flawless, and one could clearly see the bead of blood sealed within. The moment Chinyu saw this bead of blood, an angry roar seemed to resound in his soul. His ears buzzed and his eyes slackened. "Schwa." The jade box was put away. The woman paled. She earnestly asked, "How is it?" Chinyu's eyes shook. "This, the blood of the original god." "Impossible." These 3 words nearly slipped out of his mouth. Although he had never directly faced an original god powerhouse, according to Chinyu's calculations, even if they were an entire large boundary above them, it was impossible for them to be so formidable. Just a single drop of blood was enough to shake his mind. If their true body were here, he feared they could kill him with a single glance. The emperor of the Obum race and the founding emperor who established the Great Zhou dynasty were both existences at the original god realm. Chinyu had deliberately inquired about them. Although there wasn't much information about them, he was still able to find some clues. They were strong and stood above all others, but they absolutely couldn't reach a terrifying level. Not too long ago, in order to hide Lei Xiaoyu, Chinyu had encountered that super dragon beast. Its strength had likely surpassed the peak of the divine realm. But its strength was far from being able to compare to this drop of blood in front of him. It could even be said that the disparity between them was like a chasm between heaven and earth. As if sensing Chinyu's shock, the woman lifted a hand to pull back her long hair. She softly said, "It's true. Perhaps what you and I are looking for now is the corpse of a super original god. As long as we succeed, any harvest will be enough to help us achieve inconceivable improvements. Her eyes revealed a deep meaning. It can even heal the injuries caused by the divine seal Saint Stone, allowing you to restore your potential. So it turned out that this woman already knew about Chinyu. When did she recognize him? But she didn't reveal anything. This shrewdness was indeed surprising. However, if she calmly said it now, it was clear she wanted to win Chinyu's trust. She wanted to show her great sincerity towards their cooperation. Chinyu was silent for several breaths of time, suppressing his thoughts. "Since you know my background, are you still willing to cooperate with me?" The woman said, "Rumors are meaningless to me. The only thing I believe in is my own eyes." She looked at him, lights swirling in her eyes. "Although you are still vague in my eyes, there's one thing I can be sure of. You are not as simple as you appear on the surface." Chinyu arched an eyebrow. "Even if what you say is right and you are confident that I will cooperate with you, aren't you afraid that I will kill you and take everything in your hands?" The woman said, "It's true that I don't believe I can resist your slaughter, but my intuition tells me that you won't do that." A complex expression crossed her face. She hesitated for a moment and then said, "Perhaps you will find my words laughable, but I don't know why. But when I face you, I feel at ease." Chinyu's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't respond to these words. Did he have to say that he had the same feeling? That scene would immediately turn into a love story between a man and a woman. But in reality, they were only strangers. They had no prior contact, so he remained silent. Whether this woman's words were true or false, before he confirmed the reason, Chinyu wouldn't reveal his true attitude. Moreover, after she spoke, Chinyu subconsciously raised his guard. The reason he felt a sense of closeness was because he was unconsciously influenced by some strength. The world of cultivators was filled with all sorts of strange things. There were all sorts of methods one couldn't guard against. Although Chinyu was confident in himself, he wasn't blindly arrogant enough to think that he could resist all schemes. "I can agree to search for the original God's corpse with you. But during this process, if you show any signs of impropriety, I will attack without hesitation." The woman nodded. "I will also return these words to you." She turned and walked away. After a moment, she said, "You can call me Zero." "Spirit?" "Zero, which means everything returns to zero." Without speaking further, the woman looked up as if she were determining her direction. After a moment, she said, "Follow me." Whoosh! Her figure shot into the skies. At the same time, strength fluctuated around her. The shattered skin began to grow once more. For hours later, when she landed on the ground, she had returned to the ordinary appearance she had before she entered the channel. Chinyu's eyebrows arched up. This was because when facing the current Zero, the sense of closeness he felt had completely disappeared. It was clear that this skin wasn't just used to conceal her true appearance, but it also had a strong aura isolation ability. "I need to go into seclusion to determine the location of the original God's corpse. Help me protect me." As she finished speaking, an earthen yellow light surged around her, wrapping around Zero and fusing into the earth. Earth attribute supernatural ability? Because he cultivated the 5 elements samsara, he had a deep understanding of the path of Earth. Even so, he hadn't been able to feel any fluctuations from her body. Indeed, there were many strange people in this world. One couldn't underestimate any one of them. Gathering his thoughts, Chinyu sat down cross-legged. With a thought, the sun and moon force fields spread out, wrapping around him. After doing this, he swept his eyes around. From time to time, a dark golden light flashed around him. After passing through the barrier of the fragment world and entering the true heaven-eradicating abyss, there was an incomparably massive world beneath his feet. At the very least, in Chinyu's perception, this world was so large that it seemed endless. Even when he swept his eyes through it, he still couldn't see where it ended. But for some unknown reason, this incomparably massive world gave Chinyu a strange feeling. It was real, but it was also vague and unclear. This was the feedback from his eyes. But no matter how Chinyu searched, he couldn't find any flaws. This world must be hiding some sort of secret. Zero went into seclusion for a full 3 days before she emerged with a pale face. It was unknown what method she had used, but it seemed as if she had consumed a great deal of energy. A faint smell of blood wafted out from her nose and mouth. She handed a jade slip to Chinyu. I have marked the path on this. You just need to follow the directions. After Chinyu took the jade slip, she took 2 steps forwards and buried herself in his chest. Now hold me and hurry. As she finished speaking, she wrapped her arms around Chinyu and closed her eyes, falling into a deep slumber. Chinyu was stunned for several breaths of time before he regained his composure. He subconsciously rubbed his face, thinking, could it be that his current appearance really gave people such a great sense of security? Where did her confidence come from? Was she really not afraid of death? Looking carefully, Zero really was sleeping. Chinyu didn't think he was wrong about this. This woman, how had she managed to survive until today? Moreover, had he been given the good guy card? And it was the highest level good guy card. He bitterly smiled and hugged her. Chinyu probed the jade slip with his divine sense. After memorizing all the information, he exerted a bit of strength in his fingers, and the jade slip shattered. With a step, Chinyu howled into the distance. Whatever, everything had to wait. He would find the original god's corpse first. Somewhere in a fragment world, 12 cultivators knelt down on one knee. They cut their palms at the same time, allowing blood to flow out. What was strange was that none of the blood that flowed out fell to the ground. Rather, it was wrapped up by an invisible strength and floated in the air. The blood tumbled about, as if it had its own intelligence. It fused together, gradually forming the outline of a well. Looking down from the well, everything was crimson red, as if endless blood had gathered inside. We respectfully welcome Master's arrival. The 12 cultivators spoke in unison. Good-do, good-do. The crimson color in the well began to tumble about. Bubbles popped up, constantly popping and reappearing. The air was thick with the smell of blood. In addition, there was an cold aura that struck deep into the soul, causing one to instinctively feel a great sense of fear. A face appeared in the well. Because of the tumbling crimson color and the bursting of bubbles, this face constantly twisted, making it impossible to see it clearly. But the moment it appeared, loud cracking sounds began to ring out between the heavens and earth, as if this fragment world couldn't withstand the formidable strength contained within. How is it? A deep voice echoed out from the well. Reporting to Master, the plan is proceeding smoothly. Nearly a third of the cultivators have opened the barrier of the fragment world and entered the projection great world. Very good. Begin the second step. Yes, Master. The 12 cultivators rose up together. They rushed to the edge of the world at their fastest speed and drilled into the space channel. In the next moment, the fragment world began to break apart, releasing a blinding light before vanishing from sight. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.